Number 10. Pushed Peter Parker. Now, when I say he pushed Peter Parker, you might be thinking, okay, well, so what? This guy does backflips off the Empire State Building for fun. So what's a push really gonna do to this guy? Well, this was an issue because Peter Parker's spider sense didn't go off, which he found troubling. It should have went off. It's danger. Why didn't they tell him? Now, do keep in mind, this is before Venom made his big comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man 300, so his ability to block his spider sense was still a mystery. So Peter luckily saved himself with his reflexes and Good Samaritans to help him out off the tracks, but Venom was trying to get rid of Peter long before he was slurping up bad guy brains. Now, the fact that he didn't say anything catchy or announce his big plan, any villain monologue, makes it more realistic and pretty scary. Number 9. A healthy diet. What makes a deadly space goop even more terrifying? Well, let's start with its choice of meal. Us. He likes to eat us and our brains. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue 333, Venom said to Spider-Man, "We want to eat your brain." Now, him just saying that to you must be intimidating enough, let alone actually doing it, which we see in Venom the Hunger issue 1. He even surprises himself too when it goes from just being a threat to an actual thing that happens. The symbiote needs to feast on brains, not just because it's yummy and fun, but because of a certain chemical found in the brain instead. Eddie isn't a big fan of this throughout the comics and often prevents it from happening by giving Venom chocolate instead. In my opinion, that's a really good solution. Offer anybody chocolate instead of anything, they'll probably take it. Because chocolate contained the same chemical, so it worked. It was a nice tasty substitute. Until eventually writers just stopped including the need for human brains for a meal altogether, which is great. Let's just do more of that, less eating brains. And before we head over to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up down below, that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list.
Number 8. Got beaten to near death by the Phoenix Four. The Avengers vs. X-Men event was epic and mind-blowing, featuring some crazy showdowns between our favorite heroes. In A vs. X Volume 1 Part 7, Spider-Man plays a big role as he trains with Hope Summers, trying to help her learn how to control the Phoenix Force. As she grows frustrated that the fight is escalating and she hasn't been able to help, Spidey tries to reassure her that her time will come. Ironically, it's Spider-Man's time that comes later, as he covers the escape of his fellow Avengers by distracting those who are controlled by the Phoenix Force. Despite him having no chance, Spidey gets up again and again after he's beaten to a pulp, likely suffering multiple broken bones while rescuing his friends. It's a real display of heroic sacrifice from everyone's favorite wall crawler.
Number 7. Broke Black Cat's nose and heart. Venom wanted everything to do with Spider-Man. He wanted to take away everything, starting of course with his love life. So in Amazing Spider-Man 316, he goes after another close acquaintance. This time it's Black Cat. We see her in a train of thought, wondering where Spider-Man had moved to. How peculiar indeed, I wonder. So she's come to realize that her and the spider should be together, and then now Venom comes in just to ruin her entire day. Venom attacks and figures she must know where he is, although she legitimately doesn't. So before Venom heads out, he casually mentions that Parker's wife didn't know where he was either, adding insult to injury, literally. She got a broken nose, and then he's like, hey, by the way, he's married, so your night just went from good to the opposite. What a terrible night too. Imagine getting your nose broken and then someone's like, hey, by the way, she's married. Number 6, leave a trail. When Eddie Brock was doing time at Rikers Island, his cellmate just happened to be Cletus Cassidy, who was in there for, let's just say, some horrible things. So when Venom came and reunited there with Eddie, part of the symbiote was left behind as they were breaking out, taking over Cletus Cassidy. This guy was horrible beforehand. I mean, he was in there because he took out tons of guys and he bragged about it the entire time. He's sick. So that plus the symbiote equals Carnage, making its first debut in Amazing Spider-Man 361, Carnage Part 1. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains in the comic, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing Woody Harrelson play him in the live-action Venom sequel. Now, while most of this can be pinned on Cletus being the main problem here, we have to add it to the list. Always make sure you don't leave any space goop behind, especially not in prison. Come on, Venom, who do you think's gonna grab it? Number 5, ditch the gear. Sometimes when you don't need something anymore, you drop it like it's hot. Like that scene from Forrest Gump, where Forrest runs out of his leg braces. But now sometimes when you realize you don't need something and you get rid of it, sometimes you just happen to be Venom, and sometimes that thing you no longer need is Angelo Fortunato. So back in 2005, Marvel wanted to reboot Venom. So the new Venom host was Don Fortunato, after he won the symbiote in an auction. What a great win, by the way. I would definitely bet on that. He gave the suit to his son Angelo to make him more tough. Okay, sure, it works. Hey, trust me, man, it works. Eddie warned him about the risks, but Angelo didn't listen. Angelo attacked Spider-Man and ripped out his heart, only to discover that it was just an imposter. And then after a fight with Spider-Man, Angelo just left out of fear. He was getting his butt kicked, he wanted nothing to do with it. And Venom wasn't a fan of that, so he left the host mid-air. He just dropped him like a top. But his gear wasn't working properly after the fight Angelo had just caused, so how unfortunate is that?
Number 4. Tiger Tiger. Tiger Tiger was once Jessen Hohen, and as you know by now, she is a very influential figure, mainly based in Madripoor. She ended up becoming the woman known as Tiger Tiger in order to get revenge on crime boss Roche, and following his defeat, she took over his role as major crime lord of Madripoor, or crime lady, I guess. Tiger is so influential that she was part of Prince Baran's close circle back in the day. She took control of Madripoor following the defeat of Viper as Madam Hydra, who temporarily ruled the island nation. Tiger has lost complete control of the island at times, but is always considered a major key player when it comes to the governance and business of Madripoor. However, she typically is painted as the most moral of the crime lords of Madripoor. While Tiger isn't afraid to get involved in illegal activities, she does try to keep the illegal activities she dips into more clean, and doesn't really get involved in anything that could cause the people of Madripoor a great deal of harm. In other words, she's not known for trading in people or really in hard drugs, and will actively speak out against or even seek to stop crime lords who would.
Number 3. Lee Price. When Venom bonds to a host, depending on who that person is, things could be manageable. Like Eddie Brock, for example, things are manageable, it's kind of workable. But sometimes they can be even worse than before. Like in the case of Lee Price. Lee had a pretty rough time growing up. He was bullied, and his father wasn't the best role model by any way, and he treated his mother in an awful way as well. Just not a great guy, not a great house. So in order to escape this horrid living situation, Lee thought it best to burn down the apartment, all while his parents were still in there. Like I said, not a nice guy. And to get away with it, he blamed it all on a mutant with pyrokinesis, who at the time was his friend. So Lee suppressed this for years, and he grew up actually believing that the boy had actually done this. And he also thought that his dad had abandoned him the whole time. That's how far his brain has gone believing this. Later in life, he spent 5 years as a ward of the state before joining the army, until an explosion resulted in the loss of a couple squad members and a couple of fingers. Already a tough life, now enter Venom. You know it's bad when even Venom is trying to unbond with you. That's how you know. Lee used the symbiote for awful things, so much so that Venom was actually relieved once Lee had left the picture. Number 2. Anne Weying. Anne first met Eddie Brock at Empire State University. She made her comic book debut back in Amazing Spider-Man issue 375. She reflects on how once upon a time her and Eddie were in love. That's right, he was smart, witty, with a boyish charm that swept her off her feet. So what happened? Well, while they were married, Eddie became a journalist for the Daily Globe, and she was a lawyer. So far sounds great. Sounds like a lovely household with people doing great work. After she divorced him, things only got worse for her. Like for example, I don't know, she was shot by the villain Sin Eater. Yeah. And then after that, Eddie figured it's a good idea to loan her some of the symbiote to heal her up. Now it worked, but the only downside is now we have a she-Venom for a bit. She ended up ending the lives of 2 men who attacked her, so once the symbiote was returned to Eddie, she had to live with all of those memories. Unlike Lee, who had time to kind of erase and forget and just trick his mind into believing he didn't do these horrible things. Anne had this for like a hot minute, and then it went away while she was an adult. She's like, I know what happened. And it doesn't work out well for her. She was traumatized until the end of her life. She couldn't even leave her own apartment. Even for such a short amount of time, Venom can cause quite stress levels. Number 1. Planetary Attack. In Venom Space Knight issue 8, the symbiote teaches Flash Thompson a lesson about its past. Back to where it all began. Back to where the first host was born. Yeah, so after the two had bonded, he went back to his homeworld and took out everybody. Now all that remains are just graves of the dead. Venom describes this first host as a cruel and twisted soul, one who showed Venom the cruelty and twistedness of his own soul. He killed everybody on this planet, so naturally I have to put him at number 1.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Diana gets ahead of the game. One of the changes to reality that occurs during the Flashpoint event is when Wonder Woman and Aquaman get married. I mean, it's great. I mean, well, not really. I mean, weddings are fun, I guess. I don't know. I hear shout and then I black out. It's so weird how that works. So this is the reality now where Bruce Wayne was shot and not his parents. And if that wasn't wild enough, Superman is now in a government lab having a not so relaxing time. And then we see Diana being
being saved by a sea monster from Aquaman. How lovely. A nice thing. This is great. We have nice things in this list already. Lovely. Ah, yes. Classic Wonder Woman. Nice. Nothing like getting cheated on and then having your head cut off, adding injury to insult this time. And then she pops her crown off of her severed head and then places it nicely on her own head. A war, of course, follows between the Atlanteans and the Amazons, but it comes to a lovely conclusion when Wonder Woman stabs Aquaman in the back. And yes, I mean literally in a sense. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you want to go ahead and give this video a like, that would be great. You're the best. Thank you so much for watching. Let's pop right back into number 9 right off the bat. Let's keep going. Number 9, hard feelings. This next one isn't exactly a bad deed, but it's too weird of a Justice League story to not include, so I'm gonna throw it in at number 9. One I'd rather not have in my brain all day, so let's just get it out of the way. So now we go to World's Finest Comics issue 289. So Batman and Superman decide to catch up on some bro time, you know, take a break from beating up bad guys, just have a heart-to-heart, see what's going on in here. Now this heart-to-heart is the start of a wild adventure. Now the issue is titled The Krill Way of Dying, and the dialogue itself is really good stuff actually. It highlights the mental health struggles that superheroes go through, you know, not being able to save everybody. It's meaningful, it's powerful dialogue, but what takes this issue to new heights, well rather new lows, is when Superman and Batman are interrupted by a meteorite crashing, and out of the meteorite emerges the Crew. Now the Crew, not what you imagine in your head off the bat. I can tell you that because the Crew, they're a bunch of space worms, and they're attracted to sadness. That's how they found the two, because they were talking about super sad stuff, and they're like, yes, sad, this way, let's go, let's head it. Their super depression was literally glowing, so these aliens need emotion in order to pass away. See what happens when you try and feel nice things, Justice League? Way to go, now we're all crying. I'm definitely crying. They're crying, they're dead. Space worms are coming for me because I'm crying now. What a vicious circle. Number 8, he killed Balder. Spoiler warning, let's do it now while we're at it. So the Warriors 3, they didn't last long after this because when Loki went to go visit his mother, who was now a prisoner of Odin, she asked him for a favor. She asked Loki to bring her the Norn Stones, which contains Odin's power, much like the hammer. So while Loki was stealing those stones, he had to do something pretty dark and terrible. He fired an arrow through the helmet of Heimdall, and yes, the helmet was on his head. So just like that, bam, it was one shot, perfect aim, he nailed it. His favorite bow too, might I add. So Loki also had to take out his other half-brother Balder with his favorite bow. He just loves the bow thing, it's crazy. And that's of course when he was banished from Asgard, which makes sense. He should have been banished a little sooner, but that's fine. Better late than never. So while he was talking to Balder, he made him use his gifts and tell Loki what the future holds. Now Balder responds with, okay, Asgard is in ruins, your mother is dead for her betrayal, and you, Loki, you believe in nothing and you are lost. All salt and no spirit. Burn, that's a roast. There is no tomorrow with his chaos. And then Loki asks what Balder sees in his future before releasing that fateful arrow. Number 7, Tower of Babel. JLA Tower of Babel is a Justice League storyline, and one of the best storylines in my humble opinion. Written by Mark Waid and illustrations by Howard Porter, Batman is the greatest detective alive. Odds are, if you're ever in a room with Batman, he's already thought out your every move and he's planned his accordingly. He's always 2 steps ahead. That's what makes him the best. He also just happens to be the sole reason that everything goes in this storyline. He doesn't mean to, but it happens. So Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins launched this huge simultaneous attack on every member of the Justice League of America. Now the attacks are so specific, they're aware of the weakness of each League member. Now Batman was once worried that one or all of them could go rogue at any point, so he had contingency plans in order to take them out if that day ever came. So Talia al Ghul broke into the Batcave and stole those files. So if you want to take down some bad guys, here's exactly how to do it. Thanks, Batman. The best files ever. Now we have all the deepest, darkest secrets. Cool. So Plastic Man gets frozen and then shattered. A specifically designed Vibra bullet hits the Flash in the neck and causes him to have seizures at light speed, which sounds like an absolute nightmare. And Superman gets exposed to red kryptonite, and sadly, many more get hit too. Number 6, Batman ignores Blue Beetle. So back in Countdown to Infinite Crisis, Blue Beetle had actually approached his super friends and teammates after he had discovered something called the OMAC Project. So he brought it to Batman's attention, but Bruce just doesn't really give a damn at this point. He brushes him off almost immediately. Well, the OMAC Project of course turned out to be something, and when Blue Beetle discovered it, he's all by himself and he doesn't live to tell the tale. If only Batman just took him seriously in this moment, things would have turned out a lot less ugly for him. I mean, I know Batman created this thing in the first place, so it's kind of fair that he didn't listen to him, but like before Infinite Crisis, the OMACs killed a lot of people. Shouldn't have just given him like 2 minutes to maybe explain. And the fact that Batman didn't just listen to his team member, especially when he already knew something was kind of going on, Sounds like it's all on you, Batman. I don't want to be the guy to say it, but I was just the guy to say it. Number 5. Wonder Woman hunts the Huntress. The Injustice universe shows us a different side to our team members, sometimes a little darker than we're ready for. So in issue 21 of Injustice Gods Among Us Year 3, we find our main supers in a world that's not so bright. And when it comes to issue 21 of Injustice Year 3, DC shows us yet again how great Wonder Woman is at cracking that lasso of truth. It's just a matter of where she cracked it, that was the problem. Well, she wraps it around the neck of the Huntress, and the crack that we hear is exactly what you think. Bam. So Batgirl calls her out for being a murderer, even though she really didn't mean to do it. Accidents happen, especially in the middle of a battle, you know, it happens. I mean, the tension was high. The Huntress was punching through shields. Wonder Woman just reacted in a violent way. It happens, you're a superhero. I remember one time I wrist shot an orange hockey ball through a garage door thing. It's like, you know what? When you're in the middle of it, accidents happen, you get crazy.
Coming in at number 4, we've got the time Batman was the worst friend ever and slept with Barbara Gordon behind Dick Grayson's back. In the alternate future where the animated series Batman Beyond takes place, Terry McGinnis eventually found out the reason that Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson were no longer on speaking terms. Apparently, Bruce and Barbara Gordon, the girl that Dick was absolutely crazy about, had a relationship that ended in a miscarriage while Dick was out of the city dealing with personal issues. This is some incredibly heavy stuff to put in the comic follow-up to an animated children's series, and it really seems out of character for Batman to betray his protege so deeply and then handle the fallout so poorly. Whether it's iffy writing or just a really dark take on Bruce Wayne's personality, breaking the hearts of two people he claims to care about the most is a really bad look.
Number 3. Superman moves Atlantis. Injustice Gods Among Us issue 12 is the final issue of the first Injustice comic series written by Tom Taylor, and we see Aquaman just unleash the ultimate pain. He's not having an easy go at this time. He's unleashing armies on coastal cities. He's trying to show Superman that he has the power as well, and that he's not going to allow Atlantis to be taken over. So Superman is like, okay, you think you're the tough dude? No problem. Let me step in. Superman sees this as a threat, and even Batman's like, great, this is exactly what I thought was gonna happen between these two. So Superman doesn't just fly in, fight Aquaman one-on-one, and then settle their differences with this whole ordeal. No, instead Arthur gets the help of Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, and they literally move Atlantis. They move Atlantis like it's new furniture.
Pivot! Pivot!
They move it to the Sahara Desert, the place with the least amount of water possible. Not cool, guys, not cool. Number 2, Superman outs Batman. So in the climax of Batman vs Superman, we see Bruce Wayne straight up try and take out the Man of Steel. It's intense, and it ends with Superman not surviving in a way, but until he comes back in the Justice League movie. Spoilers. So if you're feeling a little upset about that, this next one should turn the tables in your mind. Superman once outed Batman, and he did it in a pretty hilarious way. Through social media, of course. Did he make a TikTok? No. Was it through Ask FM? No and no. It was in the pages of Injustice Gods Among Us issue 10. I mentioned this comic earlier because it has our super friends going against each other, but Superman takes it up to the next level when he posts Batman's true identity online. His tweet was quite simple and to the point. Batman is Bruce Wayne. 1.5 million retweets, not too shabby at all. Batman's trending on Twitter in real life almost like once a week, so I'm just waiting for the day when I look and I'm like, yes, Batman is real. And he's Paul Giamatti, get out of here, I knew it. Number 1, Justice Lords. The DCAU introduced us to the Justice Lords back in November 2003 in an episode titled A Better World. Was it a better world? No, definitely not. They were a multiversal counterpart of the Justice League. This is an alternate universe now, one where Lex Luthor is the current president of the United States. The Justice Lords were assembled to protect humanity from itself, which just sounds like bad news. That sounds like a bad story in the making. So yeah, they were robot replicas of Superman, and the inmates of Arkham Asylum were brainwashed and lobotomized. Just not an ideal world at all, definitely not a better one. And then when the Justice Lords of this universe found out they weren't alone, they tried to bring their ways of heroics over to our world. But our good Justice League took them down with the help of our Lex Luthor, who used the power disruptor to neutralize their super abilities. So it's like good Lex, bad Lex, good team, bad team, mind explosion. The idea of a rogue team member is terrifying, but a rogue team? Oh, what a nightmare. How do you stop them?
Alright, let's get counting. Number 10 took advice from a serial killer. Sort of. In one of the volumes of Fool Killer, Deadpool makes a cameo appearance when he visits his pal Gregory Salinger, who is the mass murderer Fool Killer, a man who kills anyone he deems a fool. Though he wasn't the first to don the mantle Fool Killer, Salinger has his own interpretation of what makes someone a fool. Often he has associated foolishness with those who are obsessed with the material or anyone who he is considered mediocre. Quite dangerous, as mediocrity can be very interpretive. He tried to take out both the Defenders and Spider-Man and almost killed himself after hearing someone remark that anyone who would take on Spider-Man was a fool. He spent some time in a mental hospital after being declared criminally insane. Later he got his degree in psychology and, during Deadpool's cameo, attempts to give him a therapy session. Deadpool also reminisces about the time he wanted to kill Salinger, and he ties up his girlfriend, who he confesses he really doesn't like, even going so far as to suggest that she should just die. Number 9. Forced cannibalism on Archangel. When Archangel was left wasting away, Deadpool stepped in to save him. At first sight in the comics, this appeared to be a kindness of Deadpool. He was trying to help his buddy to stay alive, effectively feeding him and saving him. Then Angel wanted to know what he was eating, and it was revealed that Deadpool was actually feeding his teammate his own flesh without Angel's consent. In other words, he was forcing Archangel into an act of cannibalism. So sure, he was saving his life, but you should probably give your teammate the opinion as to whether or not they want to eat your flesh. I also can't imagine that Deadpool would taste great.
Number 8. Azrael. Following the events of Nightfall, Batman was left broken by Bane, and Bruce Wayne as such was forced to hang up the cowl while he worked towards recovery, trying to fix his broken back. For his replacement, he chose Jean-Paul Valley, aka Azrael. Azrael would prove to be an interesting choice in the long run. Initially, he appeared to be a passionate and fearsome fit, but he ended up taking things too far, brutally attacking the criminals who opposed him in a more violent and drastic fashion when compared with Bruce's Bat. He also became obsessed with being Batman to the point that Bruce Wayne, upon his return, was actually forced to fight Azrael in order to make him give back the mantle.
Number 7. Killed his own parents. Of course, this wasn't of Deadpool's own volition per se. That is, he didn't know that they were his parents, as he had been brainwashed by the butler and had his mind wiped. Still, he returned to his parents' home in Canada, who again, he didn't remember. He was sent there to kill them as a test to see how much control Butler had over Wade. Upon his arrival, he experiences some deja vu, and Sabretooth tells him that he could always just, not follow through on the job, starting to feel a little bad for Deadpool. But Deadpool doesn't really understand why he wouldn't do the job. A job's a job, he says. But the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight shows up and interrupts them. Later on, Deadpool actually returns to his parents' house to finish the job. He seems to recognize the home and some items in it, but he still does not flinch, removes the smoke alarms, and sets the home ablaze with his sleeping parents inside. Number 6. Enslaved a man. Chef Deadpool has kind of become almost an alternate or alter ego of Deadpool's himself. He has his own pop figure and is what people refer to when Deadpool is sporting his chef's hat, and usually he's cooking something up as well. In case you didn't know, Deadpool's regeneration factor also pretty much gives him a bottomless stomach, meaning he can eat an insane amount of food, and that you shouldn't expect to win an eating contest against him anytime soon. He loves pancakes so much, he even made over 300,000 of them one time. But more than pancakes, one of Deadpool's favorite foods to eat is obviously the chimichanga. I get it, I had my first chimichanga earlier this year because of Deadpool when I was in Arizona, and they are by far one of the best things that you will ever eat. So good. His love of chimichangas drove him to do something dastardly though, when he is shown keeping a man he calls Paco as his slave in a tiny oven, where the man is forced to make him an endless amount of chimichangas. The man just wants to go home to his family, but Deadpool reminds him that the oven could get a lot hotter should Paco cease cooking up chimichangas for him. Number 5. Wore fur, and real fur too. Okay, so this has less to do with the actual wearing of real fur specifically, and more to do with the fact of who the fur used to belong to. During the events of Deadpool Kills the Marvelverse, Deadpool eliminates almost all of the X-Men by using Cyclops' optic blasts after he's captured Professor X. Somewhere in between this and when Wolverine shows up to avenge his fallen X-Men, Deadpool manages to get his hands on Beast's fur and fashions himself a headpiece. Wolverine's healing factor appears to have met its match in Deadpool's carbonadium sword, and Wolverine is taken down by Wade while he wears Logan's fallen teammate's fur like a sadistic trophy. How dare you wear Beast? Fashion faux pas. Number 4. Tried to fool the X-Men and almost succeeded. succeeded. During the 80s, Alpha Flight and X-Men had a team-up two-part story, which of course started with both teams fighting one another, but all due to a greater misunderstanding. And yeah, actually Alpha Flight during the 80s was a big thing. It was huge. We don't talk about Alpha Flight much anymore, but they were a big deal back then. Loki was up to some sneaky business here where he was trying to convince the northern gods that he was, trying to help mortals, that he was a good guy, when really he was trying to create chaos. Surprise, surprise. He had a fire fountain at his disposal, which not only sounds super flashy, but also granted magical clothing and cool powers to mortals, as well as I believe eternal life. The X-Men ended up in the city containing the fire fountain after their plane went down and crashed landed. In the end, Alpha Flight, who went to investigate and found them, who had a quick tussle with their friends, who at the time thought the city was great, before Loki revealed himself and the mutants were able to unite to defeat him after learning that the powers, magic clothing, and eternal life granted came with a price. The destruction of magical beings like Alpha Flight member Snowbird. Oh no, Snowbird! Fortunately, Loki was foiled, but this was a pretty diabolical plot. Number 3. Killed Phil Coulson. Anyone that kills Phil Coulson, that's a huge... It's bad. So bad. This mission is given to Deadpool by Captain America, who is later revealed to have been working for Hydra all along. You know, Hail Hydra and all that. Deadpool has always looked up to Captain America and as such excitedly accepts the mission, though he doesn't quite understand why he's required to take out one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s finest agents, but he trusts that Cap has a good reason. In the comics, Deadpool's point of view is also interspersed with Coulson's point of view, and we see the tragic juxtaposition of two men who admired Captain America and everything he has stood for, but who have different information in regards to who Cap really is. Coulson knows that Cap is aligned with Hydra at the time and knows what he has planned. He is seeking to get the word out and even pleads with Deadpool to question the orders he is given, but alas, Coulson is unsuccessful in swaying the mercenary and ends up dead anyways. R.I.P. Coulson. Number 2. Killed the entire Marvel-verse. This didn't happen even just once, by the way. Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe was so popular that it quickly transformed from a one-shot into the Deadpool Killogy, comprised of Deadpool Killustrated and Deadpool Kills Deadpool as well. The first time this happened is because Wade was locked up by his friends in an insane asylum for his own good, but also for kind of the good of everyone else because, you know, he can be pretty annoying. This was overall a bad idea though, as it resulted in Deadpool realizing that he and everyone else in Marvel were fictional characters trapped in a comic book, and he broke himself out, deciding that he needed to free everyone by killing them. The next time around, it was less of Deadpool's fault, as he seemed like he was the victim of some brainwashing. Number 1. Wolverine Origins. I know we can't fully blame Deadpool for this one, and that he made amends for this version of Deadpool by killing him at the end of Deadpool 2, but I just can't make a worst things list revolving around Wade Wilson without mentioning this vile atrocity. It hurts my eyes anytime I just even think of it. Ugh. In Wolverine Origins, our first insight into Wade Wilson's character is actually pretty promising. The Merc with a Mouth lives up to his reputation of being an expert killing machine who can't stop cracking wise. But then he undergoes some experimentation that takes everything that we love about him away. His mouth is sewn shut and he's fully under control of Stryker, and is now called Weapon 6. I don't know. His katanas are now Wolverine-like blades that emerge from between his knuckles. Great. Just what Deadpool likes to be known as, a bad Wolverine ripoff.
And at number 10, Siren. Siren, aka Teresa Cassidy, is the daughter of Banshee, a name she would eventually use as her alias in honor of her late father. First introduced in 1981's Spider-Woman issue 37, she is a mutant with a few nifty tricks up her sleeve, which include her sonic scream, sound manipulation, flight, hypnosis, teleportation, and of course, immortality. That one definitely comes in handy. The two first met when they were on a mission to fight Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut. There was a sweet moment when she saw him without his mask and then reinforced his confidence, and then the two just hit it off from there. But unfortunately, they weren't endgame. Typhoid Mary would put a rift in their relationship when she disguised herself as Siren and then slept with Deadpool. To make matters worse, when Siren wanted to try to fix things, Copycat, another one of Deadpool's romantic interests that we'll be touching on later, disguised herself as Deadpool and then assaulted Siren. Things only got worse from there, with the two of them later having a one-night stand during a dark period in Siren's life after her father died, with her then stating the romance was over for good. And at number 9, Black Widow. No, not that Black Widow. Well, Actually, it might have technically been because at the time Natasha was Yelena in disguise. Regardless, we're talking about the second most prominent woman to hold that mantle, Yelena Belova. Belova, who first appeared in Inhumans issue 5 in 1999, would have a brief fling with the Merc with a Mouth when she was the leader of Norman Osborn's Thunderbolts team. Also, sort of a brief fling. Deadpool, who had pissed off Osborn pretty heavily at the time, was targeted by the team and in battle took out the other members of the Thunderbolts, no sweat, but found him struggling against Yelena. Impressed by her combat skills and her looks, he attempted to woo her, and slowly his charm grew on her, and it led to a surprising kiss. Deadpool was likening her to death, one of his biggest loves, more on that later, so he declared his love for Black Widow, and you can imagine how that worked out.
Number 8. Thor croaks. Are we going to talk about the frog thing? You bet we're going to talk about the frog thing, because you know, this is a part 1, so we gotta talk about it. One of the most bizarre and yet great schemes Loki has committed to date was when he devised to have Thor turned into a frog in order to get his do-good brother out of the way so that he might rule Asgard in his place. Not only is this awful because, you know, turning your brother into a frog is never a nice thing to do, but we aren't just talking about anyone here. This is Thor. The transformation was even worse for the God of Thunder, who often prides himself on his prowess and strength as a warrior. As a frog, he was robbed of his natural sense of courage and his eagerness for battle initially, and as Frog Thor, he had to rediscover this before eventually, of course, being returned to his standard form and getting revenge back on Loki, because that's how this always goes, unless we're in like an alternate Earth.
No. Moving on to a surprising number, in at number 7, The Wasp. Deadpool has hooked up with many people over the years, some of which are pretty darn shocking, like that he managed it. Perhaps one of the most shocking is the woman who named the Avengers herself, one of the founding members, Janet Van Dyne, aka The Wasp. Now to be fair, this went down during Deadpool's Secret Wars, in which he was revealed to have actually been present for Secret Wars. During this, his face had been healed by an extraterrestrial healer, and he was handsome as hell, managing to swoon Wasp, who at the time was the leader of the Avengers. As she puts it, while they lie in bed with one another, I quote, "Well, that was unexpected." Yeah, we feel you there. It's revealed at the end of Secret Wars that Deadpool's wish was that he had never been there, which explains his absence, although in reality it was due to him not having been created yet. And at 6, Satana Hellstrom. Satana Hellstrom, often referred to as just Satana, is the daughter of Satan, and the sister of Damon Hellstrom, who is often referred to as just Hellstrom. Oh, family ties. As a child, after the death of her mother, she was taken down into the depths of hell by her father to train her in her demonic powers. Deadpool crossed paths with the character during the Deadpool team-up series, in which, after losing her soul in a high-stakes poker game to a group of 4 geeks, she seeks out the Merc with a Mouth to help her out. Turns out those geeks are actually all demons in disguise who want to marry her and become the heir to hell. Deadpool comes up with what he deems a brilliant plan and marries her himself, binding her soul with his, giving him more strength to defeat each of the demon suitors. And the demon who won the poker game was like, "Well, sure, you've got a marriage certificate, but if you're dead, that certificate does not count anymore." So he tries to kill Deadpool, but thanks to that power boost, DP is the winner of that match. Unfortunately for our favorite anti-hero though, Satana bails on him and states that they're getting a divorce. And as a part of the divorce settlement, she gets to keep half of his soul. Ouch. All he really wanted was a honeymoon. In at 5, Rogue. Deadpool and Rogue. It's a thing that happened while the two were on the Avengers Unity team. Rogue was leading it at the time, and Deadpool essentially helped keep them afloat with his cash dollars while he was with them. The two eventually developed a mutual respect, but it wasn't until the team took down Red Skull that the two hooked up romantically. After kissing, Rogue had absorbed his skin, to which she replied to his shock by saying, I quote, "I don't care what I look like, Wade, except..." She said that more southern than I just did. The relationship didn't really go anywhere past that, especially after Wade ended up killing Phil Coulson under Captain America's orders. Well, Cap was all Hydra at the time, that is, so. Killing an ally usually puts a dent in romantic relationships, especially if it was a mutual ally and an uncalled for murder. Oh, what could have been. In at number 4, Dead Man Wade. Here's one who aesthetically scares us. Dead Man Wade is from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, Earth 295. Now he's obsessed with feeling pain, so much so that he would have his teammate, Danielle Moonstar, inflict pain upon him, for pleasure, of course. Now, as part of the Pale Riders, a team of assassins who work for Apocalypse, this Deadpool was eventually killed by Nightcrawler. But later, he was resurrected to help enforce the ranks of Weapon Omega, aka the evil Wolverine, and then was later recruited to be a part of the Deadpool Corps. But the worst part? He lacks that psychotically fun-loving personality trait of the 616 Wade Wilson and other alternates. He's actually quite depressed and often confused, which is tragic, but he's also a psychotic killer, so... In at 3, Shiklah. Shiklah is a character who first debuted in Deadpool the Gauntlet issue 3 in 2014, and was also married to the Merc with the Mouth. and also divorced him. She's a succubus, and long ago her and her family ruled over the monster world in a time that predated humans. Being opposed by the vampire race, her family struggled, forced to endure an age-long war with them. And after her brothers had been killed off, Sheikla's father sealed her in a coffin until it was safe, or until she got married. Weird. I mean, the safety thing I get, but getting married, I mean, girl can handle her own. Dracula hired Deadpool to bring her to him, but along the way, Deadpool traveled through Greece with the coffin and got into a fight with a minotaur, and the coffin was shattered, releasing an awakening Sheikla. She then tried to absorb his life force by kissing him, as a succubus does, but it had no effect on him due to his regenerative healing factor, and it was love at first sight. After some more shenanigans, she and Deadpool returned to New York and got married in Deadpool Volume 3, Issue 27. Flash forward till the Death Do Us Part storyline, when their marriage comes to a halt when Deadpool catches Sheikla cheating on him with Werewolf by Night. She eventually ditches him altogether, stating that their marriage was just to protect her from Dracula, and that he sides with humans too much. While that might seem harsh, they were super into each other once upon a time, but a lot of strain had been placed on that relationship. These days, she's actually hooked up with the ultimate undead character himself, Dracula, and the two are married. Her father must not be super into that, or turning, rolling, spinning in his grave, whatever that saying is. It's like exactly the thing he didn't want to happen. And at number 2, copycat Vanessa Carlyle. Vanessa Carlyle of the comics has a bit of a different story than her live action adaptation. For starters, she has powers. Copycat first hit the scene in 1993 as herself, but technically in 1991 when she was using her shapeshifting abilities to impersonate Domino, it was a whole thing. After being kicked out of her home at a young age, the young mutant shapeshifter went into prostitution, which is where she met Wade Wilson and fell in love with him. He broke up with her after finding out that he had cancer, which broke her heart. Flash forward a bit, in the New Mutants issue 98, she assumed the identity of Domino, and in 1993, Deadpool would reveal her actual identity to the X-Force team. This began an on and off again relationship. She would eventually be fatally injured and died, which was in his arms, telling him that she always loved him. Although without her knowledge, Wade had poured some of his own blood into her wounds, allowing her to mimic his power and heal herself. She would then go on to ruin Deadpool's other relationships after she was in tip-top shape and running her own chimichanga stand. Does she get to eat them for free if she owns it? That doesn't seem like a solid diet to have, but it would be nice to have the option to occasionally have one. And finally, in at number 1, Mistress Death. Okay, sure, Death, also known as Mistress Death or Lady Death, is not technically a superhero, but she is still a powerful cosmic entity, and that's something. That's more than something. She's also a character who Deadpool has had a very prominent romantic relationship with over the years. The appeal with Death is that the two of them are star-crossed lovers. He's a man who can never die, and she is the literal embodiment of death. Now, Wade has an interesting relationship with Death in general. He volunteered for the Weapon X program because he was dying of terminal cancer. Then, when he was experimented on and tortured, all he yearned for was death. Then, his powers, when manifested, prevented him from dying. So while all that was going on, he fell in love with her, being so close to her constantly but never able to touch her. Thanos would make this even more permanent when he cursed him with immortality. Now, despite their star-crossed reality, the two of them, when they do encounter one another, however briefly, have amazing chemistry. Plus, she has a sense of humor too, so. Starting us off in at number 10, Evil Deadpool. Evil can definitely equal scary, and that's very much the case when it comes to Evil Deadpool. He's got a pretty creepy physical appearance. Now, his origin is even crazier. So we all know that over the years, Deadpool has lost a lot of limbs. He's gotten maimed pretty bad at times. And while we don't ever think about where those limbs go, gross, turns out they did end up somewhere. And that place is in the possession of Ellen Whitby, Deadpool's stalker, who saved his chopped off bodily bits in a freezer. Deadpool found out about this and chucked them into a dumpster. As one would. But when they thawed, it turns out they still had Deadpool's regenerative abilities, and they merged together to form an evil Deadpool. Running around like a Marvel Frankenstein, he went to the point of blowing up Deadpool's favorite chimichanga restaurant just to prove a point. Sounds pretty evil to me. In at number 9, Ultimate Deadpool. Ultimate Deadpool, also known as Wade Wilson, was once a US Marine sergeant in the Ultimate Universe, aka Earth 1610. He transitioned into becoming a mercenary, hunting down mutants and kidnapping them, and then forcing them to be hunted alive on live television. He even became the leader of the Reavers. Turns out at some point though, he became less human. Quite literally. His mask was torn off in battle, and it revealed that he was actually a cyborg.
Number 8. Mary Jane Trauma. Back in his first comic book appearance in 1988, one of the first things Venom did was introduce himself to Mary Jane in the next issue. In this moment, she can't even remember her name. She knows almost nothing, because her mind has been harshly numbed while she's cruelly drowned in this onrushing tide of primal fear. That's what the comic says, that's how they described it. And these emotions may never fully fade away, and it's all thanks to Venom. She's so beyond scared that when Peter walks in with the black suit on, she thinks that it's Venom for a brief second. Venom even says that although it wasn't their target, shaking her up could still work. Yeah, for sure, let's just terrify some people and ruin their lives just because. Awesome. Therapy not included.
In at 7, Dadpool. Spelled like MODOK. Little is known about this alternate, but considering it's visually clear that he's an alternate version of Deadpool amalgamated with MODOK, we can only imagine the kinds of devastation this Deadpool is capable of. He's a super genius, and also a super assassin. And he has little arms. Aren't they cute? He also has an incredibly dark sense of humor, and while that may make him sound more likable than scary, just imagine what it'd be like to stand off against this fellow. Yeah, now that's some scary stuff, my friends. In at 6, Deadpool Dinosaur. I don't know about you guys, but if I saw a T-Rex running around with a Deadpool mask on, I'd be both horrified, but also intrigued. I mean, he looks pretty awesome, right? Yet at the same time, that's one mean, lean, prehistoric killing machine right there. This is the Wade Wilson of Earth TRN-321, which is an amalgamation of Devil Dinosaur and Deadpool himself. Moving on to number 5, Watari. Also more commonly known as Ronin Pool, this alternate version lands on this list because he's incredibly intimidating and deadly. Hailing from an alternate Earth known as TRN-150, he's a 17th century samurai-inspired hero from Japan, who appeared in the 2011 5 Ronin series. And he was considered to be the most deadly samurai of his time. His physical scarring is not because of a cancerous tumor though, but rather because he was betrayed by a friend, then ambushed, then maimed, and then left for dead. It's also earned him an unsavory nickname, the Fool. After some serious dabbling in alcoholism, this Deadpool finally did get his revenge and ended up appearing as part of the Deadpool Corps to fight a villain named Dreadpool. More on that guy later though.
Number 4, King Loki. Coming from the 2004 Loki miniseries, readers got to see Loki in a spot that he's been trying to be in for a very long time. The throne. Now we saw him take the throne at the end of Thor the Dark World, then the next time we saw him in Ragnarok he was disguised as Odin, eating grapes, watching some theater, while the realm spun into chaos. Now in the story he does more than Home Aloneing it. See, King Loki defeats Thor in the story, and he has Asgard in his grasp. Now if you're looking to see an entirely new take on the character, check out these 4 issues coming from the mind of Rob Roddy with pencils by Asad Ribic. Now I have no doubt we're going to see Loki's ruling in this show, so you might want to freshen up as well.
Moving on to number 3, Headpool. Headpool is one of the most recognizable alternates of Deadpool. Headpool originates from Earth 2149, otherwise known as the Zombieverse, or Marvel Zombies. Now, Marvel Zombies was very similar to the 616 universe prior to the zombie infection that devastated it. That went down when Sentry punched his way from another alternate universe, carrying a disease that would turn any living being into a flesh-eating zombie. Makes COVID seem much less scary, doesn't it? Headpool used to be a zombie Deadpool, being infected shortly after the infection broke out, and was part of the attack on the Silver Surfer. Now after that, he seemingly disappeared, until he popped up on Earth 616, calling him the Merc with half a mouth. He ended up getting decapitated though, reduced to only a head, hence the name Headpool. Later, he would be finished for good when evil Deadpool stuck his head into a microwave, causing him to explode. Up next, number 2, Dreadpool. Dreadpool is often considered to be the deadliest alternate version of Wade Wilson. From Earth 12101, he's an alternate version who isn't referred to as Dreadpool in the comics. That's actually the product of him being referred to as such by co-creator Cullen Bunn. First appearing in 2012's Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe issue 1, Dreadpool is a version who really loves murdering people. In Deadpool Killustrated, he started a multiversal massacre, trying to wipe heroes from the pages of literature at the realm of ideas, which was known as the Ideaverse. Creative way of killing a lot of characters. Dreadpool stuck around for a year before getting killed by the 616 Deadpool after the other Deadpools from the Deadpool Corps were killed off. And last but not least, in at number 1, Venompool. Dreadpool might be the most sinister of the Deadpool alternates on this list, but Venompool is by far the scariest looking alternate. He first appeared in Venom Deadpool What If back in 2011, a 4-part miniseries that followed this venomized Deadpool hanging out in the 1980s in the alternate reality of Earth 90211. Now his origin story follows him pre-venomized. He was hired by Galactus to kill the Beyonder. Wade Wilson found the Beyonder at a nightclub, but was then enticed by the Beyonder to party with him. So while the two were hanging out in the Beyonder's flying limousine, Spider-Man shows up, demanding that the Beyonder rid him of the symbiote costume. Spider-Man is then shot out of the vehicle, but the symbiote jumps off of him and then bonds to Deadpool, and chaos ensues. Well, fun-loving chaos, but he's still scary nonetheless.
Number 10, invulnerable to telepathy. So Deadpool's healing factor actually renders him extremely resistant to telepathy. That's because the neurons in his head are in a constant state of flux, with his dying cells being rejuvenated at an accelerated rate. However, this is a sometimes, who's writing Deadpool ability, meaning that the level of resistance can vary. Still, even if a telepath can get in there, they can rarely make sense of everything going on, especially back when Deadpool still had multiple caption boxes. Number 9. Healing tied to mental state. Now, most everyone knows about Deadpool's enhanced healing factor and how he can heal from pretty much anything. He's been decapitated, he's been turned to a puddle of goo, and then he had to drink cable. It was a whole thing. But did you know that how effective his healing factor is tied to his mental state? So he heals faster and more well-handedly when he is not only conscious, because then there is some intent behind the power, but if he is unconscious or depressed, then it can be much slower. Which is actually a state Deadpool occupies more than some people think, as he has a lot more to him than just quirky fourth wall breaks. His first series by Joe Kelly, the one that began to define him and move him away from the Deathstroke ripoff he began as under Liefeld, actually had a lot of angst and sad Deadpool, singing in the shower and the like. Deadpool has range.
Coming in at number 8, we have Tobias Whale, the arch enemy of Black Lightning. An African-American albino crime lord that originally got his start as the leader of the gang known as the 100 in Metropolis, he's worked his way through many different criminal organizations over the years, even serving as a public face for Intergang for a time. His most notable criminal act occurred after the school teacher Jefferson Pierce spoke out against Tobias's drug trafficking, which Tobias repaid by murdering one of Jefferson's students. This incident was what prompted Jefferson to become the hero Black Lightning in the first place, and while it may have added a superhero to the world, Tobias's brutal way of sending a message shows that he's one of the most powerful crime bosses in all of Metropolis.
Number 7. Immortal. Deadpool is effectively immortal, and for a time that was independent of his healing factor, though that of course helped. Rather, he had been cursed by Thanos, who was jealous of his relationship with Death, because Death had quite the fondness for Wade, and for Thanos, not so much. However, over time it has shifted to Deadpool's healing factor just being so intense there is no stopping it. So his time with Death is fleeting. They share brief moments until he returns to the land of the living. He even low-key cheated on his wife with her. This is when he had her kill him so he could go help resurrect Peter Parker, who he had killed, under mistaken instructions that he was a villain. I say low-key because he was high-key emotionally cheating with Peter in their series Deadpool/Spider-Man. But then, him and his wife ended up divorcing for reasons explained in another book that you were also supposed to be reading, because give Marvel all of your money, so it was fine. Number 6. Invulnerability to pain. Now, there have been different schools of thought on this one. One is that Deadpool is in constant pain because of his cancer's never-ending battle with his healing factor. Hence, he is in a way numb to everything going on around him. The second is that the constant flux of his healing factor deadens him to pain, since his surface is never truly stable and his skin is always in flux. Either way, Deadpool can take a lot of punishment, being able to quip his way through being disemboweled or dismembered, or even just a floating head, and we're not just talking about Headpool. Number 5. Super strength? So this factoid tends to arise from the fact that Deadpool has lifted the hammer of Thor. Let me explain. Firstly, some would take this to mean that he is worthy, while others would have it mean that it must be strong, because no way should Deadpool be able to lift that hammer except for comedic purposes. Which is of course what this was. You had Deadpool in the little winged helmet with a cape, manipulated by Loki into stealing the hammer. But here's the thing, he never actually had Thor's hammer. Loki cloaked the real hammer and then transformed Deadpool's clothes. However, that aside, in general, many fans feel that the feats Deadpool accomplishes require some form of super strength in order for him to pull them off. What do you think? Super strength or just years of murking people?
Coming in at number 4, we have Roman Sionis, aka Black Mask. A longtime Batman villain and one of the most prominent figures in the Gotham City underworld, Black Mask is best well known known for his, well, black mask, apparently handcrafted out of the coffin of his own mother. Originally a member of the Gotham elite as the CEO of Janus Cosmetics, Roman fell into ruin after his company failed. Blaming Bruce Wayne for his own poor business sense, Roman embraced the name of Black Mask and formed his own criminal organization called the False Face Society, intending to fight back and reclaim the city that he thinks has done him so much wrong.
Number 3. Venompool. The Venomverse graced the world with many Venoms from all over. So this version of Deadpool comes from the edge of the Venomverse, like the edge of the Spider-Verse, get it? So he was investigating a warehouse full of parasitic worms and ended up bonding with the symbiotes that he could expel the worms who had attached themselves to him, which of course gave him all the powers of the symbiote. So of course the constructs, the excess strength, and agility. Venompool would be willingly absorbed by a member of the poison species, the natural predators of the Clintar, aka symbiotes. And as a result, he would become Poison Deadpool, so that he could be a double agent, cause no matter the universe, Deadpool is Deadpool. Watch out. Number 2. Caption boxes. For a period of Deadpool's history, he had multiple narration boxes, and they all had different voices and typesets and colors, and would tell him different things. It was thought for a while that this was the manifestation of a power that allowed him to be aware of the fourth wall, and also assess situations from a variety of angles. It would later be revealed that the caption boxes were actually different characters in his head, being caused when Deadpool has regenerated near someone who was also for all intents and purposes dead. So he has merged them. So Madcap, a Captain America villain, was the more psychotic voice, while the other voice was never properly identified, though some claim was Deadpool's psychiatrist. So Deadpool, he can absorb people and keep their consciousnesses alive. Terrifying. And number 1. Enter white space. Deadpool can move with ease in Gwenpool's white space, and as seen in the series Gwenpool Strikes Back, can lead the way into it. The white space is a metatextual space where Gwenpool operates, observing, changing, and mocking the Marvel world. Deadpool was able to inhabit it, understand it, and create a flowchart within it. It makes sense, what with his meta-awareness, that he should be able to move with ease in such a space. However, everything except the end retcon which happened in that series needs to be taken with a grain of salt, as the author said via Gwen in the story that it was meant to be future-proof. Still, Deadpool was there, and he did it.
Number 10. Deadpool Dinosaur. Deadpool Dinosaur is a version of Deadpool that is a T-Rex. The main thing that indicates his Deadpool-ness is that he's wearing a Deadpool mask and is part of the Evil Deadpool Corps. The Evil Deadpool Corps are a group of villainous Deadpools originally led by an alternate Deadpool, Dreadpool. They aim to eliminate all Deadpools across the multiverse. Deadpool works to stop them and annihilate this villainous group in the story Deadpool Kills Deadpool with the help of his own good team of Deadpools, known simply as the Deadpool Corps. Deadpool Dinosaur is accompanied by his own Moon Boy, who looks a lot like Logan in the face, if I'm being honest. Is this just me noticing this? This version of Moon Boy also fights from Deadpool Dinosaur's saddle with a big gun. The two are basically an alternate version of Moon Boy and Devil Dinosaur, with of course some Deadpool mixed in there. Number 9. Deadpool. This version of Deadpool is basically a combination of former evil AIM leader MODOK and Deadpool himself. One can assume he has the brilliant mind of MODOK, but also has the brilliant fighting skills of Deadpool, even with his tiny, disproportionate arms. Not only does Deadpool seem to fight with swords, but he also has 2 turret firearms on his head. While MODOK stands for mental organism designed only for killing, Deadpool supposedly stands for destructive engine of assassination, despite panpygoptosis, obsessed with opponent liquidation.
Number 8. Rejected at birth. Before the monologues and ruling, Loki was just a kid born into royalty. He made his first comic book appearance in Venus issue 6, and in the Silver Age he entered with Journey into Mystery issue 85. His father was King Lafay, leader of the giants of Jotunheim, and Loki was born not a frost giant, but rather he was pretty petite. He was small and frail, so much so that his parents were actually kind of embarrassed to call him family. He wasn't even allowed to play with the other giants. Poor Loki, from birth he's had a rough go. But it only gets worse.
Number 7. Cesspool. We don't know that much about Cesspool. Like many of the darkest alternates of Deadpool, Cesspool was part of the Evil Deadpool Corps. What we do know of him is that he has a terrifying appearance and mutation. He's completely covered in mouths with razor-sharp teeth and uses these to try and devour his opponents. Yipes. This is like something straight out of a horror movie. Number 6. Galactipool. This alternate version of Deadpool was too dark for even main continuity Deadpool himself. Galactipool shows up just as we thought the fight was coming to a close between the Deadpool Corps and the evil Deadpool Corps. Galactipool is a combination of Galactus and Deadpool, and Wade wondered where in the heck the evil Deadpool Corps even found an alternate like this Galactus Pool. Fortunately, despite him likely having, I guess, some kind of intense cosmic power, alternate Deadpool, Lady Deadpool, manages to defeat Galactipool using the Deadpool Corps ship, B. Arthur. Sadly, this was the end of B. Rest in peace, B. Number 5. Wolverine Pool. What happens when you take Deadpool and Wolverine and mix them together? You get Wolverine Pool. Wolverine Pool comes from the alternate Earth of 1946. Wolverine Pool is the ultimate Weapon X program weapon. He is a version of Wade Wilson who had adamantium bonded to his skeleton. He belonged to the evil Deadpool Corps and was killed during a fight with the non-evil Deadpool Corps. It is assumed that he of course has a healing factor, but not one strong enough to regenerate himself when reduced to just a skeleton, and likely a healing factor that was weaker than both the main continuity Wolverine and the main continuity Deadpool.
Number 4. Banished again. Okay, so Thor returns with the hammer this time. Loki is totally screwed, and Thor decides that it's probably best to finish the trickster off. But with Loki and his powers, it's evidently not an easy task, especially when Loki summons an army of Asgardian monsters. It's heated, and then Odin came down to bring the pain himself. Odin too sent some Guardian warriors and removed most of Loki's powers. So those hammer hits from Thor are going to start to leave a mark. So he reverted back to his old ways and he tried to talk himself out of these situations. So he ranted about how he was jealous of Thor, how he wanted to see him finally go down. He even took a jab at us humans for some reason. He's like, look at these fools. They believed all these illusions. Look how stupid they are. They bought it. Meanwhile, I'm like, that's nice. That's really nice. So Thor does a trick of his own and sends Loki right back to Asgard to atone for his sins. But guess what?
Number 3. Headpool. Headpool is the version of Deadpool from the Marvel Zombieverse of Earth 2149. He is aptly named Headpool because in the end, that is all that's left of him. A head. But a head who is still very much alive, that is, and would still very much like to eat you. This version of Deadpool was also not confined to just existing in the alternate Earth of Earth 2149. He ended up making his way to Earth 616 while he still had most of his full body actually. He ended up making his way to Earth 616 while he still had mostly his full body actually. He was thought to have been completely decimated during a fight there, but it turns out he survived, but simply had lost the rest of his body and was now just a head. Number 2. Dreadpool. One of the darkest alternates around, Dreadpool is the version of Deadpool who appeared in Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. He is from the alternate Earth of 12101, where he was driven even more insane than he already is. A therapist known as Dr. Benjamin Brighton attempted to brainwash Deadpool so he might use him for his own means. However, this failed, and instead ridded Deadpool of his standard inner voices, replacing them with a single voice. This voice in his head seemed fully aware that nothing in the Marvel Universe was actually real, and encouraged Deadpool to free everyone from this fictional prison or fictional reality by killing them all off, which Deadpool then proceeded to do. Basically, Dreadpool is from Deadpool's darkest timeline. Number 1. Evil Deadpool. Evil Deadpool is an alternate Deadpool from the main reality of Earth 616. He is sort of a Franken version of Deadpool who was created by the deranged and psychotic Dr. Ella Whitby. Ella Whitby accidentally helped to create him from storing bits and pieces of Deadpool's body, which had been lost throughout his life while he fought. She collected these because she was obsessed with Deadpool. She was also madly in love with Wade. Though they were stored in her fridge, they were likely part of her shrine of collectibles of Deadpool. In the end, Deadpool found these parts in her fridge and tossed them out. As they thawed in the garbage bag he disposed of them in, they came to life and rejoined together to create Evil Deadpool. A version of Deadpool that is evil and just an all-around complete jerk for the sake of being one, whose fighting skills rival the real Deadpool and who also has a backwards arm, which actually proves to be surprisingly useful in fights for him.
Coming in at number 10, we have the disfigurement of the tragic villain known only as Bootface. Batman is infamous for having a strict rule against killing any of the henchmen or villains he often fights against, but that doesn't stop him from doing some major damage, and no one shows that off clearer than Bootface. A former criminal who made the extremely unfortunate choice to try and attack Batman with a flamethrower, Bootface was permanently scarred when his flamethrower malfunctioned, and Batman kicked him in the face during the fire, grafting the imprint of Batman's boot directly on Bootface's, well, face. Bootface would return as part of a group of similarly injured villains that wanted revenge on Batman for permanently altering the course of their lives, and while it could be argued that maybe these guys shouldn't have been living a life of crime in the first place, it still is pretty messed up just how far Batman is willing to go, even if he's technically not breaking his no-killing rule. Coming in at number 9, we have the time that Batman made Robin dig his own grave. Yes, the Silver Age of comics has more than its fair share of wild moments, but few can probably compare to the cover image of Jimmy Olsen and Robin being forced to literally dig their own graves while Batman wields a Tommy gun. Now, apparently the actual story behind this cover is because Batman has lost his memory and been convinced that he's actually a member of the Mafia. While Superman still retained his sense of self, he had to pretend to go along with the Mafia act until he was finally able to return Batman's memories, but not before likely traumatizing Robin and Jimmy Olsen for life by making them dig their own graves at gunpoint.
Number 8, Mimicry, from the Ultimate Verse. So we're going over to the Ultimate Verse for this one, where characters had different abilities and the like, just cuz, fresh slate, etc. The Ultimate Universe was a comic line started by Marvel in order to create a jumping on point for new readers, who may be intimidated by the huge backlog of Marvel canon. It would of course eventually develop a large backlog of its own, and be done in by some large, questionable events. Many fans will point to the very gory Ultimatum as the turning point. The Deadpool of the Ultimate Verse was a cyborg who could mimic people's appearances and voices, but not powers, so close, but no life model decoy. Still, you could pass as another person like that for a while, if no harrowing situation came up and they weren't a person who just used their powers willy-nilly.
Coming in at number 7, we have Batman deciding to resurrect the Joker. Batman's always been in a weird moral place with how often he's let the Joker live, and the question of how many people have died because Batman refused to end his archenemy's life is an often asked one. But when the Joker was betrayed by Ra's al Ghul and left to bleed out, Batman made the hasty decision to save his nemesis with the power of the resurrecting Lazarus Pits. And while resurrecting the Joker did allow Batman to stop Ra's al Ghul's bioweapon from being unleashed, the Joker soon returned to his evil and crazy ways, leaving Batman potentially to blame for any further death and destruction the Joker might cause. Coming in at number 6, we have a Golden Age Batman highlight with the time he straight up murdered a henchman with the Batplane. Batman's earliest adventures are notable for not quite having polished out the details of the character yet, with stories featuring him using guns and being a lot less uptight about the whole no-killing thing. One of the biggest examples was how Batman treated the superpowered henchmen of the villain Dr. Hugo Strange in the very first issue of his self-named series, using the Batplane's machine guns to take out a criminal truck driver before using a noose on the back of the Batplane to wrap around the neck of a genetically altered mental patient labeled as a monster. You'd think that maybe the comic would imply that Batman was just airlifting the monster somewhere else, but the narration makes it clear that nope, Batman just flat out hung a guy. The 1940s were definitely a different era. Coming in at number 5, we have Batman spying on the entire superpowered population with Brother Eye. Following an event in which Batman had his memory wiped by Zatanna and then eventually remembered it, Batman realized he would never be able to fully trust the Justice League, or any powerful metahumans for that matter. In a case of majorly overcompensating for this issue, Bruce Wayne constructed Brother Eye, an artificial intelligence housed in a secret satellite that kept tabs on every superpowered being on the planet, all without anyone knowing they were being watched. Of course, this tech would later be manipulated and abused by the villain Maxwell Lord, showing that sometimes Batman's paranoia can go a bit too far and have disastrous effects on the rest of his team.
Number 4, get a room. Look guys, superheroes have emotions just like us, okay? They meet other superheroes and they take down bad guys together. They hook up in the sky in the owl ship above the rest of the world. They're just like us, okay? Sometimes key intimate moments are hard to conceal when you have the powers of a god, right? Specifically Wonder Woman and Superman. So after the triumph that is The Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller decided to dive into an intimate moment with those two. So Wonder Woman and Superman embrace in each other, but where does this happen? In a fancy hotel? Fortress of Solitude? No and no. They get it on up there in the sky, of course, where everyone can see and hear. So they're superheroes, so this caused massive tidal waves. Volcanoes are blasting off, people are even evacuating islands. Like, this is a bad day. I mean, bad day for everybody but Superman and Wonder Woman. They look like they had a great time.
Coming in at number 3, we've got to go with Batman keeping logs on how to defeat the rest of the Justice League. During an event known as the Tower of Babel, Ra's al Ghul manipulated his daughter into giving up Batman's secret files that he had assembled on all the Justice League members and how exactly to defeat them if they ever went rogue. And while Batman claimed this was all because of the very real possibility of the team being compromised or being controlled by an enemy force, it's kind of hard to defend your choice as being the right one when Martian Manhunter was lit on fire, the Green Lantern was made blind, and Superman was poisoned with red kryptonite. Bruce Wayne may be smart, but in the hands of a villain, his plans just might be deadly. In a similar vein, coming in at number 2, we have Batman hacking Cyborg the very first time they met. While this incident occurred in the alternate Injustice universe, the idea behind it is essentially the same as our last entry. Batman has a hard time trusting people, and sometimes that gets revealed at the exact wrong moment. With the Justice League divided as Superman becomes a villain in this universe, Batman temporarily injures Cyborg with an electrical virus, which Cyborg quickly realizes would be impossible with his new firewalls, and then makes the realization that the virus's date signature reads as the very first week that Cyborg and Batman ever met. Ice cold, Bruce. Ice cold. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have to go with Batman's treatment of Robin in the infamous series All-Star Batman and Robin. There's always been a bit of weirdness to the dynamic of Bruce Wayne teaching a child or teenager to become a violent vigilante sidekick in his quest for justice, but this alternate universe miniseries by Frank Miller definitely takes the cake. With this version of Batman constantly verbally berating Dick Grayson with some dated language that we definitely can't use on this channel, the worst moment of all comes when Batman locks Dick inside the Batcave as some form of intense training under pressure, forcing the boy to live in pure darkness and eat rats to survive. With all the awful things Batman has done over the years, torturing this young boy who just wants to be a hero might be one of the worst.
Number 10, Hugo Strange. Is there anything scarier than the image of Hugo Strange as Batman? While you might be a bit surprised to hear this one, fans of the classic detective comics of the 70s surely will not be. This plot was part of the story arc that began with issue 471 and shouldn't seem that surprising to those who are familiar with Hugo Strange's obsession with Batman. Strange went further than the Joker did recently in Joker War with his plot though. He might not have had Bruce's millions, but in a plot to take over as Batman, he impersonated Bruce Wayne, who he found out was Batman, and committed crimes all over Gotham while under the guise of Bruce's Batman. He also fashioned his own suit, Batcave, and even created his own Robin and Alfred. Now that is commitment. Number 9, Tim Fox. During DC's Future State, we see a new mysterious Batman appear on the scene and take up the mantle. Except not too mysterious, as it's really been talked about a ton as to who would be this new mystery Batman prior to even issue 1 of the next Batman's release. It's none other than Tim Fox. As of issue 2, we still don't really know exactly what events went down to lead Luke's estranged brother Tim, or as he prefers to be called, Jace, to take up the mantle, but we can guess what might have inspired him. Likely, like Batman, a lack of justice and a personal loss. His sister is actually currently in a coma, and while others seem to actually blame the masks for her predicament, it seems like Jace actually feels more inspired to don a mask himself, the mask in fact, in Batman's absence, following what was believed to be Batman's death. I gotta say, with each issue, I'm actually warming more to the idea of Jace's Batman, who also appears in the Future State Justice League as well, and I absolutely love his costume.
Coming in at number 8, we've got to go with the super assassin Deathstroke. While in recent years the infamous Slade Wilson has become more well known for tormenting the Teen Titans, Deathstroke has also had many run-ins with the Justice League and the Dark Knight himself. With his brain operating at 9 times the efficiency of a normal human being, Deathstroke is exactly the type of opponent that pushes Batman to his physical limits with a complete mastery of every weapon at his disposal. Combine that with his Icon suit, which has been shown to even be able to withstand a punch from Superman, and this is a foe that Batman is always just barely able to outwit.
Number 7, Thomas Wayne. Our Flashpoint Batman ends up being none other than Batman's father, as in this alternate reality, young Bruce Wayne is the victim of that fateful mugging instead of his parents. And if you thought Bruce was living in the darkest timeline as Batman, Flashpoint would like to remind you that you are sorely mistaken. Things could always be a lot more dark than even our main continuity Batman. Thomas Wayne as Batman not only has to deal with the loss of his son, but also the fact that this loss drives his wife completely insane, turning her into Batman's #1 enemy, the Joker. And when they both find out there is a reality where their son lives, becomes Batman, and they actually died, both Flashpoint Martha Joker and Thomas Batman agree that whatever it takes, that reality needs to be saved. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick little reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you love Batman as much as I love Batman, and who doesn't love Batman? Number 6. Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne becomes Batman in an alternate future where the first to inherit the mantle, Nightwing, Dick Grayson, has actually died. This ends up changing Damian, who believes killing may actually be necessary again in some cases moving forward. Hated by many as Batman, Damian does his best to protect Gotham with any means necessary. Damian also filled in for his father at one time in the main continuity when Bruce Wayne was unable to patrol. Young Damian told his father not to worry, as he would sub in as Batman for the evening in his father's absence. Number 5. Helena Wayne. I have always loved Helena Wayne and the idea of Batman and Catwoman having a daughter together to live on and uphold their legacy, which is why I love Helena Wayne stepping into the role of Batman, even if we only got to see her do so for like one issue. In the final issue of Earth 2 Society, we see Helena Wayne become the Batman with her own Robin even as her sidekick. I love that Helena decides to leave the name as is, seeing it as a symbol of hope and as a legacy that she is proud to be a part of. I also love that her Robin is actually Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon's son, John. So cute. Earth 2 is neat.
Number 4. Hulkpool. This character appears in the comic Hulked Out Heroes. He is a gamma-irradiated version of Deadpool. So a Hulk Deadpool. All that power and rage and strength and Hulkness. Being sent to kill his original Deadpool because he was a murderer with no remorse. Alternate timeline things. This was a whole world of Hulks, hence the title of the series. Hulkpool travels around time, finding himself in World War II, eventually kills the alternate Deadpool and makes his way back to the main verse with the help of his friend Bob the Hydra Agent. Oh, Hydra Bob. Now there's a fun character. Very venture bros, just low-level grunts in huge organizations trying to get by.
Number 3. Tim Drake. After Jason takes up the mantle of Batman and starts actively defending his new role, Tim Drake attempts to stop him. Since Nightwing actually refuses to become Batman, he himself decides to take a stab at it. Using his brilliant mind, he is able to track down Jason as Batman, who is hiding out in his own weird version of the Batcave. Or, not really hiding out, more like lying in wait. When Bat Tim confronts him, Bat Jason also ends up taking him out. Fortunately, in the end, Nightwing does show up to defeat Jason, and Damian Wayne and Squire actually show up to save Tim Bat just in the nick of time, as everything's collapsing. Number 2. Terry McGinnis. Of course, I cannot have a list of non-Bruce Wayne Batmans without mentioning the one, Terry McGinnis. Terry McGinnis is actually the genetic son of Bruce due to the scheming of Amanda Waller. Realizing that Batman was getting on in years and seeking to make the perfect replacement for him, she started Project Batman Beyond, which the animated show that Terry appears in takes its name from. Waller found the perfect psychological matches to Bruce's parents, and without them knowing, managed to actually rewrite the reproductive DNA of the male of that couple. Later on, Terry was born, making him the genetic son of Bruce Wayne, despite his biological parents being Mary and Warren McGinnis. Waller even attempted to have his parents assassinated, attempting to create similar conditions to Bruce Wayne's upbringing, and hoping to inspire Terry to become a vigilante and begin training at a young age, with his parents' death. However, the assassination plot fell through, so instead, Terry grew up with his parents alive. They had a second son and would later divorce. Warren, though, would end up being murdered, which would inspire Terry to become Batman and lead to a team-up and crime-fighting partnership between him and Bruce. Number 1. Dick Grayson. I mean, you knew he was going to be number 1, right? Following the events of Battle of the Cowl, Dick finally accepts the role of Batman, taking up the mantle for himself and replacing Bruce. Dick Grayson is usually seen as the legacy Batman, the heir to the Bat that we all kind of expect, as he was the first Robin. Even though Damian Wayne is Batman's biological son, Dick still often plays the role of oldest sibling and firstborn under the wing of the Bat. So it makes sense that he would be the one to inherit that title when Batman is believed dead. However, in the end, it would be revealed that Batman actually wasn't actually dead, but was simply blasted into the past, and that the body they initially believed was his was only that of one of Granny Goodness's clones of him. Eventually, Batman would return, and Dick would end up returning to his superhero mantle of Nightwing once more.
Number 10 took his own life, right in front of Robin no less. Of course, this was all part of a plot to get into the exclusive Death Cheaters Club, but he still made Robin take part in this wacky scheme. Not only did Robin have to stand by and witness Bruce drink a poisonous concoction so that he might momentarily die, but he also was involved in that scheme. It was Robin's role to go and retrieve the doctor, who was at Wayne Manor to visit the elderly butler, Alfred. Dick had to pretend this all happened randomly, by the way, and wasn't planned at all. While the doctor attempted to revive Bruce, he began to worry with every passing second if Bruce would manage to recover, and how awful Dick would feel if Bruce died. He was like, this is terrible, what if it doesn't work out? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you'd feel that way. I feel like this is not an activity that your kid's sidekick should be involved in. You shouldn't just be like, I'm just gonna take my own life and put myself in this place, but don't worry, it'll all work out, and just be here and make sure it works out. That's a lot of pressure. I'm like 11, Batman. Number 9 made Robin dig his own grave. This actually happened to Dick Grayson's Robin in the comic World's Finest in issue 197. One of those stories where the plot is all based around one shocking, comic-selling, cover-featured moment. In this case, the moment was getting Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen and Robin to dig their own graves, while Superman and Batman stand over watching them, threatening to kill them once they're finished. Oh my goodness. How could this happen? Well, I mean, Batman was going to do the killing here anyways, because Superman has a very strict moral code that he simply cannot break. But I know, you're probably wondering, how did this happen? It's so crazy. Look at this cover. While this seems awful because, like I said, shock factor, in reality this all came about as a misunderstanding. Batman had bumped his head and believed that he was Mafia crime boss Lucas. I think I'm saying that right. Lucas. However, once his memories were recovered, it was too late. Superman was forced to seemingly kill Jimmy and Superman using his heat vision at the behest of the real Lucas, who appeared on scene. But don't fret though, this was all a clever ruse created by Superman to help them all escape safely, as well as apprehend the criminal. The overall plan also involved wax figures and a little piece of mint candy, because classic comics. I was wondering that when I saw Jimmy and Robin get melted, that's what I was wondering. I was like, wait a minute. They melted like pretty intensely, like a candle. They must be wax figures. Also, I love that can all happen in front of like a bunch of people and everyone's like, yeah, that looks legit. Alright friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about some more dastardly deeds that Batman has done to Robin, trust me, there are lots more, because classic comics and everyone was terrible back then. So be sure to let us know that you love this list by giving it a thumbs up, and maybe I'll have some more terrible things that Batman did to Robin to tell you about.
And at number 8, Death Mask. Hailing from Earth 11638, Death Mask is essentially Deadpool combined with Dr. Doom. Let that sink in for a second. Considering who both those individuals are, it's kind of terrifying, isn't it? A completely criminal, insane super genius, this version of Deadpool came to be when Reed Richards used a new scientific experiment to try to cure him from a fatal brain tumor. Reed removed the tumor, but not without unexpected consequences. Deadpool's intelligence skyrocketed to super genius levels, and he began referring to himself as Death Mask, wearing a mechanized suit that looks just like Doom's. And he jumps between genius and bad crazy like the flip of a switch.
Number 7, letting them fight it all. One of the worst things he ever did to Robin, Stephanie Brown, was probably to have ever let her fight at all, especially as this was considered such a controversial topic by Batman's friend at the time, Dr. Leslie Tompkins. In the story War Games, Stephanie Brown attempts to win Batman's favor back after being fired by him by putting a plan in motion to give Batman control over all the rival gangs of Gotham. Unfortunately, this doesn't work out, because she's missing crucial information involving the real identity of Matches Malone. Spoiler, Matches Malone is Batman. And Stephanie ends up being captured and tormented by Black Mask. In the end, she succumbs to her injuries, but it was later revealed that this was because Tompkins, who recovered Stephanie, allowed her to die, all to prove a point to Batman about raising kids to become vigilantes. This would later be retconned so that, in truth, Dr. Tompkins had actually faked Brown's death to prove a point, but took her with her afterwards when she fled, not actually allowing her to die. I mean, I agree with that retcon, because I feel like otherwise Wow, you made Leslie seem like really terrible. And yeah, that would be awful. Still though, if Batman had never had Robins to begin with, Stephanie would have never joined him, been fired, and then ended up almost dying after falling into the dangerous, sadistic hands of Black Mask. All in all, a lot of grief could have been avoided if Batman just didn't have Robins. Number 6. A Batcave bedroom. In Frank Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, the list of injustices committed against poor Robin, Dick Grayson, are very long. Included in this long list is the time that Bruce made Robin sleep in the Batcave. Literally, Bruce Wayne is a super rich millionaire type who has a giant house and could have let Robin sleep anywhere else. But here, Batman is trying to, I don't really know, is teach Robin a lesson? Torment him into submission? I'm not really sure of the motivation, but either way, he feels it's better if Robin is forced to sleep in the Batcave to learn probably some kind of lesson. The Batcave is a literal cave, by the way, so it's drafty and completely unsuited for sleep when it comes to comfort levels. I feel like it might be time to call child services on Batman. Someone, get Robin help. Number 5. Rats for dinner. As if the previous point wasn't enough, Bruce not only deprived Robin of a warm, dry, and draft-free place to sleep, but he also deprived him of a rat-free place to sleep. The Batcave you see is filled with rodents apparently, and when young Dick Grayson asked Batman and Alfred about dinner, he was refused any food from the household and instead told that he should catch his own supper, forcing him to dine on rats. What is happening? All-Star Batman was really brutal, not just to people he didn't like, but even to those he supposedly did like, such as Robin. Although I think maybe Batman needed to turn Robin into like a big jerky jerk like him in this universe before he would fully like him, because this Batman was definitely a jerky jerk. So maybe that's what was up with all the making him sleep in the Batcave and eat rats and stuff. Number 4. Killed Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse was the nickname given to Maya Lopez's aka Echo's father. His real name was Willie Lincoln, and he ended up dying because of his connection to Kingpin. Initially, Wilson and Willie were best friends, thick as thieves, and Fisk appreciated Willie's off-the-wall nature. Wilson himself was a bit crazy when it came to his behavior at the time, and having Crazy Horse around helped him to feel, I guess, a little bit more sane by comparison. That is until Crazy Horse got a little too wild even for Wilson. Kingpin ordered Lincoln killed and then raised Maya as his ward. He sent her to all the best schools, seeing potential in her. You can imagine Maya's reaction when years later she realized that Wilson was the one responsible for taking her father from her. She attempted to kill Wilson, shooting him point blank in the head. Fisk would actually surprisingly survive this, though he would be left blind for a time as a result of that attack. I still can't believe that he survived it. Like, that's crazy. Number 3. Unable to save Robin. In this case, Batman was unable to save Robin this time around in the Batman Beyond universe when he was kidnapped by the Joker and Harley Quinn. For this one, we're talking about Tim Drake Robin. Tim Drake was out on patrol on his own. He ended up kidnapped and hidden in Arkham Asylum for 3 weeks, with Batman unable to find him while he was tormented and brainwashed by the Joker and Harley into becoming Joker Jr., and also was coerced into revealing secret intel about Batman as well. This whole thing, it was pretty awful. And although Batman can't be held responsible for Joker and Harley's actions here, it is pretty strange that Robin managed to stay missing for 3 weeks, and also that he remained hidden away in such an obvious place as Arkham Asylum. I thought Batman was supposed to be one of the world's greatest detectives. The pain didn't end there for Tim either. No one would happen to catch a sneaky microchip that was implanted in Tim, which years later would actually cause him to regress, with Joker's personality gradually taking him over again. Fortunately, Terry McGinnis' Batman at that point was there to save the day and managed to destroy the chip, freeing Tim for good. But that wasn't Bruce Wayne Batman, that was Terry McGinnis Batman, so just saying. Number 2. Dead. Probably one of the worst things even in Batman's mind that he has ever done to any of his Robins is when he let Jason Todd die. Well, I mean, he didn't let him die. He wasn't just like standing there and he was like, yeah, I'm just gonna look the other way for this one. He did try to save him, but unfortunately he made it too late. This also would create a major shift for Jason, who would return many years later alive once more, feeling as though not only did Batman fail to save him, but he also failed him in the sense of abandoning him, as Jason did manage to survive. Now granted, Batman and the rest of the Bat family, they never knew about that. So although Jason still holds this grudge somewhat even today, it feels like he's expecting a lot from Bruce and company. Cause like, they would have been there for you, Jason, if they knew. However, if you ask Batman, not being able to save Jason Todd would probably be pretty high up on his own list of worst things he has ever done to a Robin. Number 1. Killed almost all of them. Despite it being in the name, it's sometimes easy to forget that the Batman who laughs was also once very much Bruce Wayne and the vigilante hero known as Batman. However, after being exposed to some very noxious Joker venom stored in Joker's spine and last breath, as Batman snapped his neck, killing him, Batman began to change. He became more and more paranoid and villainous, becoming ultimately an insane, almost hybrid version of hero and villain. Part Batman, part Joker when it came to his psyche. This prompted Batman to summon all of his Bat family members, but rather than ask them for help, he killed them all. Well, all of them except the Robin who was also his son Damian Wayne, who he instead offered a place at his side. Damian accepted and was spared, but every other Robin was pretty much murdered by the Bat himself, at least in this dark multiverse reality.
Coming in at number 10, we have the head of the demon, aka Ra's al Ghul. The leader of a criminal organization known as the League of Assassins, Ra's al Ghul is over 600 years old and dedicated to wiping out most of humanity in an effort to cleanse the planet of disease and pollution. The secret to his long life and the reason he earns a spot on this list is his mastery of the Lazarus Pits, mythical locations connected to ley lines that are capable of resurrecting the recently deceased and have kept Ra's al Ghul essentially immortal for over half a millennium. Combine that with the endless resources and followers that Ra's al Ghul has gained over the years, and you have quite the formidable villain. At number 9, we have Bane, the man who broke the Bat. A brilliant warrior who was raised from childhood inside an island prison, Bane's most notable act was when he systematically weakened Batman's support system and eventually faced and bested him in single combat, shattering Bruce Wayne's spine over his knee. This victory over the Dark Knight was only temporary, but has still given Bane an intimidating reputation that he more than lives up to, going on to become a supervillain crime boss and always looking forward to another rematch where perhaps he can break more than just Batman's spine.
Number 8. Framed Spider-Man. If you think J. Jonah Jameson is bad, wait till you see what happens when Osborn takes over control of the Daily Bugle. At one point, Norman Osborn tries to use the paper himself to drag Spider-Man's name through the mud after buying it and then blackmailing Jameson into giving him full control over the paper and what gets published there. He then frames Spider-Man for murder, making it look like his webbing basically caused someone to die by asphyxiation, and puts a bounty on Spider-Man's head, starting off the Spider Hunt story arc. Of course, Peter finds a way out of all of this trouble and makes sure that Norman gets his in the end, but he still has to suffer through everyone hunting him down and believing that he was a killer, so still, it's pretty terrible. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you love Norman as much as we do. Love hate.
Coming in at number 7, we have The Predator. And no, I can assure you, you didn't accidentally switch over to an 80s movie themed YouTube channel. In a crossover event during the 90s, Gotham City found itself being used as the hunting ground by a member of the Predator race. Seeking out impressive warriors to fight, the Predator nearly started a civil war amongst Gotham's criminal underworld by killing some of the gangsters' best fighters, and even managing to put an intervening Batman into a full-body cast. Batman soon recovered, however, and was able to defeat the Predator and convince his race to leave Gotham alone by using a high-tech suit capable of seeing through the Predator's cloaking. Aliens being defeated by sonar-powered bat gadgets? Don't you just love comic books? Coming in at number 6, we've got to go with Clayface. When you're facing off against the world's greatest detective, being able to disguise yourself as anyone seems like a very useful skill to have. This alone would make Clayface a difficult foe for Batman to overcome, but combine that with the huge amounts of physical strength that Clayface possesses when he changes into his more monstrous form, and you have a rare mix of stealth and strength that keeps Bruce Wayne on his toes, usually forcing him to rely on a creative use of water to finally stop Clayface in his very muddy tracks. At number 5, we've got a literal god of the Greek pantheon with Ares, the god of war. In an alternate universe in which Ares declared war against the entirety of existence, Batman stood with the rest of the Justice League in a battle that literally lasted for eons, until the sole combatants left in the entire universe were Ares and Batman, still standing through sheer willpower alone. After landing a blow that knocked Ares' magical helmet off, Batman was forced to put the helmet on to finally defeat and decapitate the God of War, leaving him the only survivor of this burned out universe. And while this version of Bruce Wayne would go on to become the Merciless, a bat-themed God of War from the dark multiverse, it still goes to show that the Batman is capable of taking down literal gods. Speaking of literal gods, we've got someone that's weirdly close enough with the infamous Batmite.
Number 4, eaten by his father. Yeah, this one's oof. In War of the Realms, the Dark Elf Malekith returns from imprisonment, starts a war in his homeworld of Svartalheim, and was crowned a king. The next step was to assemble the League of Allies from across the 10 realms, forming the Dark Council. Now among those was King Laufey and Loki. Now a family discussion breaks out. Laufey confesses to Loki that he's the worst thing to ever come from his loins. Nice use of the word loins there, good stuff. And he referred to him as his one great shame. As if the roast wasn't hard enough, he proceeds to eat Loki with a very loud crunch to go along with the visuals. Yum.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Poison Ivy, one of the villains most associated with Batman, but who may have been hiding her power levels just a little bit. Poison Ivy has always been dead set on protecting the green plant life of the Earth, and especially values it over human life. In a particularly noteworthy case, Poison Ivy was able to mind control essentially the entire human population through their consumption of fruits and vegetables. And while that's definitely some weird comic book logic, Batman was only barely able to defeat her by bringing her into contact with the one human being she cares about the most, Harley Quinn. You gotta love when love saves the day. Coming in at number 2, we have the Batman who laughs. Now, you obviously can't have a Batman villains list without at least somewhat referencing the Joker, but this wild combination of Bruce Wayne and his greatest foe might just give Mr. J a run for his money when it comes to power. In a dark, alternate world where the Joker realizes he's dying and begins a mass killing spree of everyone in Gotham, Batman is forced to finally kill his fated foe. Unfortunately, at the moment of death, Bruce was infected with a special brand of Joker venom that completely flipped his moral compass, but left intact all of his intelligence and planning. All of the chaos of the Joker with the brains of Batman. This supervillain is Batman's worst nightmare come to life, and has only been able to be defeated with the entire help of the Bat family. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have one of the biggest bads in the entire DC Omniverse, Darkseid. The leader of Apocalypse and one of the more feared villains that the Justice League has ever faced, Darkseid is known to even be capable of defeating the usually unstoppable Superman in direct combat. You would think that a normal human being with no superhuman abilities would be completely ineffective against an evil god like Darkseid. However, during the event known as Final Crisis, with the entire fate of the universe at stake, Batman finally broke his no guns rule and fired a bullet of Radion energy into Darkseid's heart, wounding him enough to stop the Final Crisis. And while Batman may have temporarily been believed to be dead due to being hit with Darkseid's Omega beams, it wasn't long before the Dark Knight had returned and proven that even ultimate evil isn't enough to keep him down.
Number 10. A healthy diet. What makes a deadly space goop even more terrifying? Well, let's start with its choice of meal. Us. He likes to eat us and our brains. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue 333, Venom said to Spider-Man, "We want to eat your brain." Now, him just saying that to you must be intimidating enough, let alone actually doing it, which we see in Venom the Hunger issue 1. He even surprises himself too when it goes from just being a threat to an actual thing that happens. The symbiote needs to feast on brains, not just because it's yummy and fun, but because of a certain chemical found in the brain instead. Eddie isn't a big fan of this throughout the comics, and often prevents it from happening by giving Venom chocolate instead. In my opinion, that's a really good solution. Offer anybody chocolate instead of anything, they'll probably take it. Because chocolate contained the same chemical, so it worked. It was a nice tasty substitute. Until eventually writers just stopped including the need for human brains for a meal altogether, which is great. Let's just do more of that, less eating brains. And before we head over to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a thumbs up down below, that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list. Number 9. pushed Peter Parker. Now, when I say he pushed Peter Parker, you might be thinking, okay, well, so what? This guy does backflips off the Empire State Building for fun. So what's a push really gonna do to this guy? Well, this was an issue because Peter Parker's spider sense didn't go off, which he found troubling. It should have went off. It's danger. Why didn't they tell him? Now, do keep in mind, this is before Venom made his big comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man 300, so his ability to block his spider sense was still a mystery. So Peter luckily saved himself with his reflexes and Good Samaritans to help him out off the tracks, but Venom was trying to get rid of Peter long before he was slurping up bad guy brains. Now, the fact that he didn't say anything catchy or announce this big plan, any villain monologue, makes it more realistic and pretty scary.
Coming in at number 8, we have the time that Batman launched a villain into space. Once again, Batman's no-killing rule was placed under a bit of stress when Batman Incorporated's Japanese division found itself under attack by the immortal supervillain Lord Deathman, a bad guy that was even able to resurrect himself from having his corpse thrown into a literal volcano. Outraged at the destruction that Deathman had caused, Batman's solution was a fate even worse than death, locking the villain within an unbreakable safe and then launching that safe into the darkness of outer space. Sure, the bad guy's not gonna die, but trapped in a small box floating endlessly for the rest of eternity? That's a bit of a yikes punishment, Batman.
Number 7, transformed Carly Cooper. And not in a good way. While under the mantle of Goblin King, Norman sought information from Carly on the true identity of Superior Spider-Man. He had her kidnapped, and when she refused to give up the information, she refused. He decided to recruit her into his Goblin army. Exposing her to the Goblin formula, he turned Carly into one of his own deranged minions, and for a time she served him under the mantle of Monster. She would eventually be returned to her former self, but this experience would leave its mark, changing Carly forever. Immediately after her recovery, she also cut Peter Parker and Spider-Man out of her life and moved from New York to New Orleans. Though she would come back. She would get over it, but it was still pretty terrible.
Number 6, leave a trail. When Eddie Brock was doing time at Rikers Island, his cellmate just happened to be Cletus Cassidy, who was in there for, let's just say, some horrible things. So when Venom came and reunited there with Eddie, part of the symbiote was left behind as they were breaking out, taking over Cletus Cassidy. This guy was horrible beforehand. I mean, he was in there because he took out tons of guys and he bragged about it the entire time. He's sick. So that plus the symbiote equals Carnage, making its first debut in Amazing Spider-Man 361, Carnage Part 1. He's one of the biggest, baddest villains in the comic, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing Woody Harrelson play him in the live-action Venom sequel. Now, while most of this can be pinned on Cletus being the main problem here, we have to add it to the list. Always make sure you don't leave any space goop behind, especially not in prison. Come on, Venom. Who do you think's gonna grab it?
Number 5, became a werewolf. This version of Spidey appears in Marvel Zombies Army of Darkness Volume 1. He doesn't really have a large role or anything, but being transformed into a werewolf has gotta be a new low for Spidey. In the comic, we see him with big old wolf ears and big hairy arms ripping out of his costume, and it is not lit. Can you imagine werewolf Spider-Man swinging through the moonlit sky chasing you down to eat you? Yikes. The werewolf web-slinger and his fellow superhero werewolves ravage the world and eat Galactus, later chasing after Ashley Williams when he appears in this universe.
In at 4, Outlaw. Outlaw, aka Inez Temple, first debuted in Deadpool Volume 1, issue 65 in 2002, created by Gail Simone. Her nickname is Crazy Inez, which helps paint a picture as to why her and Deadpool hit it off. They met after Deadpool made some major waves in the mercenary world by accomplishing an almost impossible mob hit. There was a lot of flirting between the two, but nothing actually went down, and Deadpool shortly afterwards was assumed to have been killed off. But then, Inez found herself hitting it off with Alex Hayden, aka Agent X, who many had believed at the time was actually Deadpool with amnesia. This was due to several similarities from the body scars to the healing ability, and Alex had shown up on the scene shortly after Deadpool disappeared. Well, at least it looks like she's got a type.
Number 3, director of Hammer. During Dark Reign, we see Norman Osborn basically become the head of what ends up being the S.H.I.E.L.D. replacement. Due to the fact that he eliminated the Skrull Queen, he gets to take over and creates his own agency called Hammer, an acronym that doesn't initially stand for, well, anything actually. It was just picked because Osborn thought it was cool. As the director of Hammer, Osborn also took it upon himself to put together his own Avenger team, with him as the leader, Iron Patriot. Being a villain himself, you can guess what kind of people he called on to assemble his Avengers team. More villains, and some really confused and tormented heroes like century. This was a really dark time in Marvel's history, as Norman Osborn used all this power to do all sorts of awful stuff, all under the guise or in the often false name of heroic reasoning.
Number 2, Anne Weying. Anne first met Eddie Brock at Empire State University. She made her comic book debut back in Amazing Spider-Man issue 375. She reflects on how once upon a time her and Eddie were in love. That's right, he was smart, witty, with a boyish charm that swept her off her feet. So what happened? Well, while they were married, Eddie became a journalist for the Daily Globe, and she was a lawyer. So far sounds great. Sounds like a lovely household with people doing great work. After she divorced him, things only got worse for her. Like, for example, I don't know, she was shot by the villain Sin Eater. Yeah. And then after that, Eddie figured it's a good idea to loan her some of the symbiote to heal her up. Now it worked, but the only downside is now we have a she-venom for a bit. She ended up ending the lives of 2 men who attacked her, so once the symbiote was returned to Eddie, she had to live with all of those memories. Unlike Lee, who had time to kind of erase and forget and just trick his mind into believing he didn't do these horrible things, Anne had this for like a hot minute and then it went away while she was an adult. She's like, I know what happened. And it doesn't work out well for her. She was traumatized until the end of her life. She couldn't even leave her own apartment. Even for such a short amount of time, Venom can cause quite stress levels. Number 1, planetary attack. In Venom Space Knight issue 8, the symbiote teaches Flash Thompson a lesson about its past. Back to where it all began. Back to where the first host was born. Yeah, so after the two had bonded, he went back to his homeworld and took out everybody. Now all that remains are just graves of the dead. Venom describes this first host as a cruel and twisted soul, one who showed Venom the cruelty and twistedness of his own soul. He killed everybody on this planet, so naturally I have to put him at number 1.
Number 10, got dragged off to fight in another dimension. This version of Peter Parker has it pretty rough. When he was a boy, his parents died in a car crash, and his Uncle Ben was highly abusive. In his anger, he adopts the name Charlie Parker instead of Peter. He's a problem child, and he spends 2 years in a juvenile detention center. By age 13, he's living on his own and using his abilities to steal from drug dealers. If that's not bad enough, he's later recruited into the Superior Spider Army, picked up by Ashley Barton, and dragged off to fight in an alternate universe where the Earth is irradiated, without so much as an introduction or an explanation. There's like, let's go, no time to explain. This version of Spidey is pretty grumpy, and it's easy to see why. Regular Pete already has a hard time, but this guy got dealt a seriously crappy hand. Still, having spider powers does seem pretty awesome. Number 9. Stopped a train with his body. In the second Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire, Spidey goes through some burnout after losing MJ to John Jameson and having his friendship with Harry Osborn fall apart. During this time, he's lost his spider powers and he gets attacked by Doc Ock. After an intense battle, the Mad Doc leaves Spidey to rescue a rogue train heading off of the rails. Pete, having already taken off his mask, puts himself directly in the line of danger and is stretched to the point of nearly breaking in two as he gives everything he's got to stop the train. The effort leaves him battered, bruised, and barely conscious, and in a touching moment, the citizens of New York move him to safety and return his mask, swearing that they won't tell a soul. It's a touching tribute to Spider-Man's sacrifice, and it definitely looks pretty painful. Hey Nerd Squad, if you like these videos and you want to see more, take a second to hit that like button and ring that notification bell. We really appreciate it.
And at number 8, Orxa. Orxa is a character who first appeared in Deadpool Volume 2, Issue 33 back in 2011. She's an alien who helps run Futsal Intergalactic Towing and Recovery, and has married a slew of characters in the past whose names she actually has tattooed on her arm. When Deadpool shows up at the Futsal station, having killed one of those husbands, she assaults him. So what does DP do? Well, he gives her a big ol' smooch, which calms her down, but she also believes that the kiss was a marriage proposal. She actually ends up helping save Wade during a mission, one in which another alien named Ob, who loves Orxa, is trying to kill him in, which then left Wade severely injured, with wounds that normally would have killed him if it wasn't for his healing factor. While he heals, Orxa and Ob fall in love, and because his wounds should have technically killed him, he's considered dead, which is the one requirement necessary to allow for a space divorce between him and Orxa to happen. So all in all, this alien lovin' did not last long.
Number 7. Broke Black Cat's nose and heart. Venom wanted everything to do with Spider-Man. He wanted to take away everything, starting of course with his love life. So in Amazing Spider-Man 316, he goes after another close acquaintance. This time it's Black Cat. We see her in a train of thought, wondering where Spider-Man had moved to. How peculiar indeed, I wonder. So she's come to realize that her and the spider should be together, and then now Venom comes in just to ruin her entire day. Venom attacks and figures she must know where he is, although she legitimately doesn't. So before Venom heads out, he casually mentions that Parker's wife didn't know where he was either. Adding insult to injury, literally. She got a broken nose, and then he's like, hey, by the way, he's married, so your night just went from good to the opposite. What a terrible night, too. Imagine getting your nose broken and then someone's like, hey, by the way, she's married.
Number 6. Turned into a lizard beast and then died. In this universe, it was Gwen Stacy who was bitten and received spider powers, and the experience had a profound impact on Peter Parker. Pete idolized Spider-Woman and was desperate to be like her. So desperate, in fact, that he experimented on himself in a scene that goes horribly wrong, and he's transformed into a terrible lizard-like creature. He shows up in this form at the Midtown Senior Prom, where he does battle against Gwen. After a serious beatdown, Peter returns to his human form, but he still dies from his injuries. Being dead has probably got to be one of the worst things that's happened to Peter, but it's not as bad as all the suffering that some other versions of Spider-Man go through.
Number 5, tried to make Spider-Man his heir. If you can't beat him, make them join you. That was Norman's thinking in the Revenge of the Green Goblin story anyways. Here, Norman attempts to brainwash Peter Parker into giving in to his dark side and joining the Green Goblin legacy. I guess I should say his green side. Of course, Norman didn't succeed in the end, but for a moment there, it almost seemed like he might. He also put Peter through hell during this whole endeavor, so regardless of whether or not his plan was successful, it was still pretty awful for Peter the whole time. Number 4, Jason Todd. In Battle for the Cowl, we see the Robins kind of battle it out for the right to become the next Bat, after Batman is believed dead following a fight with Darkseid, sort of. In reality, everyone wants Dick Grayson to become the new Batman for the most part, but he refuses. This leads to Jason Todd impersonating Batman and donning the cape and cowl, armed with guns, as is usually his thing. Jason Todd proves to be a lethal and deadly version of Batman, who ends up taking out almost all who oppose him with bullets. Pew pew.
Number 3, Lee Price. When Venom bonds to a host, depending on who that person is, things could be manageable. Like Eddie Brock, for example, things are manageable, it's kind of workable. But sometimes they can be even worse than before. Like in the case of Lee Price. Lee had a pretty rough time growing up. He was bullied, and his father wasn't the best role model by any way, and he treated his mother in an awful way as well. Just not a great guy, not a great house. So in order to escape this horrid living situation, Lee thought it best to burn down the apartment, all while his parents were still in there. Like I said, not a nice guy. And to get away with it, he blamed it all on a mutant with pyrokinesis, who at the time was his friend. So Lee suppressed this for years, and he grew up actually believing that the boy had actually done this. And he also thought that his dad had abandoned him the whole time. That's how far his brain has gone believing this. Later in life, he spent 5 years as a ward of the state before joining the army, until an explosion resulted in the loss of a couple squad members and a couple of fingers. Already a tough life, now enter Venom. You know it's bad when even Venom is trying to unbond with you. That's how you know. Lee used the symbiote for awful things, so much so that Venom was actually relieved once Lee had left the picture.
Number 2. Ben, the last person alive on Earth. This version of Spider-Man is actually Ben Parker, in an alternate reality where he received spider powers when he accompanied his nephew Peter to a science demonstration and was bitten by a radioactive spider. Ben decided to use his powers to help others, but retired after his nemesis, the Emerald Elf, discovered his identity and killed his wife and Peter. Later on in life, Ben is approached by Ezekiel Sims, who warns him of the imminent arrival of Morlun, Devourer of Totems, on a mission to destroy all Spider-Folk. Ezekiel allows Ben to hide in his bunker under Sims Tower, and while he's there, the whole city of New York and presumably the world is subjected to nuclear destruction. He only emerges from the bunker later when the other Spider Totems arrive in the universe to enlist his help. He is reminded by the OG Spider-Man of his own advice about great responsibility, and he suits up one last time to help the Spider Army. It must have been really lonely just sitting around in that bunker though. Damn. And here we are at number 1. Turned into a zombie and ate Mary Jane and Aunt May. This one is just seriously messed up. So in this story, a zombie virus is infecting heroes like Luke Cage and Hawkeye, and eventually Spider-Man as well. After being bitten by Colonel America, Spidey takes a punch that dislocates his jaw, and then in this fight realizes the level of destruction happening all across the city. He realizes in the moment he's gonna have to go save Mary Jane and Aunt May, so he just bails, swings off to go and save them ASAP. Unfortunately, he does show up a little too late, and the zombie virus is already working its way through his body. When MJ approaches, he lashes out and bites her, and as she turns into a zombie, Pete sets to work on Aunt May. Ultimately, we are treated to this horrifying scene in which Spidey holds up Aunt May's severed head and screams at it. Yeesh.
Number 10.
Cheated. We find out about this one in Red Goblin, Red Death, and what's worse, it's a story that in the present day of that comic has a pretty gruesome ending. Here Norman runs into an old Empire University pal, if you could call him that. Ned Tobolowsky was someone Norman knew in school, and it's implied that at least they were friends, or at least acquaintances, before Ned spilled the beans about a cheating apparatus that Norman was using and had built. Ned's big mouth almost cost Norman his schooling. He lost his scholarship and was almost expelled, like these close. Honestly, if he created a cheating machine though, he probably should have been expelled in my opinion. Like, I don't know how they let him continue going to school after that. Norman gets Ned back though when Ned stops him on the street years later while he is Red Goblin. Not a good time. So true, what happens to Ned at least wasn't necessarily Green Goblin's doing, but I'm gonna count this anyways because 1, this thing happened way in his past, and 2, this list is more centered around Osborn as Goblin as opposed to like any specific Goblin identity. It's called Green Goblin, but I'm approaching it as like a Norman Osborn list. I know we've seen others wear that mantle as well, but I think Norman by far is one of the most dastardly Goblins out there, red, green, or otherwise. Number 9, reshaped the universe. This one only gets ranked lower because it comes to us from the alternate reality of a What If comic. In this What If story, Norman Osborn gets his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet and uses it to reshape reality, all to impress his daddy. What's even more awful is when his father confesses that he actually loves him. Norman then can't even bring himself to believe his father's acceptance, and in the end destroys his father, thereby destroying himself in the process. So this was in a weird way not just a bad thing he did to reality, but also did to his own self, which I guess would be a good thing for reality. Definitely be a good thing for Spider-Man. No.
Number 8, Venom Pool. In a story that has continued through various What If issues, we get to meet Venom Pool. Venom Pool is an alternate version of Deadpool from the alternate Earth of 90211. Here Deadpool ends up becoming bonded with the Venom symbiote during his time with the Beyonder, following a run-in with Peter Parker, who was bonded with the symbiote at the time. The symbiote leaves a defeated Peter Parker for Deadpool and bonds with him. Later on in his life, this is a path that leads Deadpool to end up killing all the heroes of his universe, whom he does not find attractive. He does let the attractive ones live. I guess that's something, I guess. Following a therapy session with Doc Samson, who this version of Deadpool also promptly kills thereafter, he realizes he needed to be true to who he was. This allowed Venompool to accept that who he was a massive jerk, and prompted him to use a weapon called the Retcon Expungifier to wipe out the entire universe. Basically, he's in the running for being the biggest jerk of all the Deadpool alternates.
Number 7. Became a heartless killer and died. Introduced in What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine in 2008, Assassin Spider-Man is a serious dude. This version of Spidey becomes an assassin that works alongside Wolverine, which sounds super awesome and not like one of the worst things to ever happen to him. However, he eventually becomes kind of jaded, with no qualms about killing and just doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Worse still, this version of Pete doesn't even make any quips or crack jokes like the Spidey we know and love. He literally has a gun in his web shooters. He is eventually recruited into the Spider Army, but later he tragically dies. Still, not the worst thing to happen to Spider-Man.
Number 6, drove Harry insane. I mean, I don't think we can blame Norman for all of Harry's villainous actions, but we can definitely blame him, I think, for most of them. As of late, Harry has resurfaced as the villain known as Kindred, twisted into some combination of Harry's soul combined with that of a demon. This even darker version of Harry blames both Peter and his father for everything that went wrong in his life, and comes back to hold them both accountable and make them pay. I guess you could also look at it in the way that Norman and Peter share the blame here for Harry's psyche cracking. As in loving both of them and then discovering their true identities, it created great conflict in him, causing him to turn on Spider-Man and later also to resent his father and his role as Green Goblin, and kind of his legacy really, because he also, you know, Kinda gets that crazy from his dad, just saying.
Number 5. Ditch the gear. Sometimes when you don't need something anymore, you drop it like it's hot. Like that scene from Forrest Gump where Forrest runs out of his leg braces. But now sometimes when you realize you don't need something and you get rid of it, sometimes you just happen to be Venom. And sometimes that thing you no longer need is Angelo Fortunato. So back in 2005, Marvel wanted to reboot Venom. So the new Venom host was Don Fortunato after he won the symbiote in an auction. What a great win, by the way. I would definitely bet on that. He gave the suit to his son Angelo to make him more tough. Okay, sure, it works. Hey, trust me, man, it works. Eddie warned him about the risks, but Angelo didn't listen. Angelo attacked Spider-Man and ripped out his heart, only to discover that it was just an imposter. And then after a fight with Spider-Man, Angelo just left out of fear. He was getting his butt kicked, he wanted nothing to do with it. And Venom wasn't a fan of that, so he left the host mid-air. He just dropped him like it's hot. But his gear wasn't working properly after the fight Angelo had just caused, so how unfortunate is that?
Number 4, slept with Batgirl. Although honestly, I wish I could count this for Babs too, but she's never been a Robin, so although it feels like there is some injustice that was done to her here as well, we're just gonna focus on the pain that these two caused Dick Grayson, Nightwing, who is basically Batman's surrogate son in almost every reality. And probably one of the most famous Robins. This one comes from the Batman Beyond continuity and apparently happened when Dick Grayson was out of town. Not only is this messed up because, well, I mean, Babs was Dick's girlfriend, akin to a daughter-in-law to Bruce, but he also ended up getting her pregnant. The affair between Bruce and Babs ruined Nightwing and Batgirl's relationship, obviously, and afterwards Bruce didn't even stay with Barbara as the two broke up after she lost the baby. Major yikes alert.
Number 3. Became one of the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse. This has actually happened to Spider-Man on 2 different occasions. Once in Cable and Deadpool number 15 in 2005, and then again in Avengers Volume 4. In these 2 stories, Apocalypse unleashes his master plan for world domination, which includes recruiting 4 people he finds fit to be his Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The 2010 version is especially horrifying, with Spidey being horribly mutated into this hairy white beast, seemingly fused to a horse-like creature that looks like it's made of webbing. Being used by evil bad guys is bad enough, but being turned into a hideous monster for that is definitely not Spider-Man's finest hour.
Number 2, killed Gwen Stacy. We all know this one to be one of the worst things that Norman as the Green Goblin has done, so I don't think it's a surprise that this one is high up on our list. One of the worst, not just from Peter's perspective, by the way, but also from fans' perspectives. Many still believe that Gwen was actually the one destined to be with Peter, and in fact, that she would be a better match for him than Mary Jane herself. I personally love MJ and Peter together, and I like to think of Gwen's death as a what if that can only really ever theoretically be answered if she lived. Still, even just from Spider-Man's perspective, this has to be one of the most dastardly deeds his foe has ever committed, as Peter Parker for years has also still blamed himself for Gwen's demise, making this wound just that much more tender, that much more deep. Green Goblin did it, but then Peter still blamed himself. Rough. Number 1, had children with Gwen Stacy. It was really hard for me to try and reason which of these last few points was really the worst, because they're all really bad, especially these last 2. Killing Gwen or having children with her. Which one is worse? In the end, however, considering that he later kills her, I figured this one took the cake. Yep, as if Norman Osborn wasn't diabolical and creepy enough in the comics, we had to retcon in something even more nauseating for him. Enter Sin's past. Here it's retconned in that Norman and Gwen slept together, and as if that wasn't bad enough, he got her pregnant. She gave birth to twins in secrecy in Europe who would be raised by Norman to think that Spider-Man was their father, and that it was he who had killed their mother. I'm not sure if it gets any worse than that, but if it does, I don't think I want to find out how it gets worse.
Number 10. Hulk smashed. When Loki tried to tame the Hulk in the first Avengers movie, he got ragdoll into cement in the Avengers Tower. It was kind of a funny moment for theaters, especially that little squeak that Tom Hiddleston lets out when he's lying there. It's so funny, it's great. Well, according to E. Paul Zare, who has a PhD in neuroscience, and Dr. Kirk McGee from the QEII Health Sciences Center, Loki would have been kind of screwed. He would have been in a lot of pain here. Due to the whip-like actions of the Hulk swinging him, Loki would apparently have a crushed skull, fractured vertebrae from the cervical or neck region all the way down to the lower back, broken ribs, dislocated hips, crushed tibia and fibula, and crushed metatarsal ankle bones. Loki would also suffer internal damage as well. like punctured lungs, a ruptured septum in the heart, a lacerated liver, ruptured spleen, kidney damage, and a ruptured bladder. Now, I get that he's part of the whole God Squad, but he's got to feel at least a few of these. And we have proof that he did feel those, because in Thor Ragnarok, when Thor gets ragdolled in a similar fashion, Loki gets up excitedly and says, "That's how it feels." So you can tell he's been thinking about this a bit. Number 9, stuck in a tree. Now I know that doesn't sound very frightening off the bat, but when it comes to Asgardian magic, this can be quite daunting. In Journey into Mystery issue 85, the first time we see Loki on the pages, before he even gets up to anything crazy in the comics, he was condemned by the gods to be trapped in a tree. In a tree! He's to remain there until somebody sheds a tear for him. Now, Loki, obviously, no one's gonna be crying over him, he was kind of the worst, but someone did cry. Someone did shed one tear for Loki. Might be a little bit different than you think. So he's been in this tree for ages now, but slowly and surely he's able to control the tree. And I don't mean like the trees from Wizard of Oz either, like not gonna huck apples at Odin. He can just manipulate the tree in small ways. So when Heimdall's passing that tree, he commands the tree to shed a leaf, and the timing was so perfect. The leaf just fell and then poked him right in his eye, causing, of course, a tear to fall after. And voila, we see Loki emerge from this tree and just run for it, just run for the hills. And his first plan of attack was to seek revenge on the one responsible for his tree time, Brother Thor. Number 8, Mary Jane trauma. Back in his first comic book appearance in 1988, one of the first things Venom did was introduce himself to Mary Jane in the next issue. In this moment, she can't even remember her name. She knows almost nothing, because her mind has been harshly numbed while she's cruelly drowned in this onrushing tide of primal fear. That's what the comic says, that's how they described it. And these emotions may never fully fade away, and it's all thanks to Venom. She's so beyond scared that when Peter walks in with the black suit on, she thinks that it's Venom for a brief second. Venom even says that although it wasn't their target, shaking her up could still work. Yeah, for sure, let's just terrify some people and ruin their lives just because. Awesome. Therapy not included. Number 7, his true origins. It's gotta be a tough time to find out your parents aren't even your real parents. It happens quite often in these comics, but Loki was raised in the Odinson household, and he felt like he belonged there at least. Well, mostly. I mean, sure, Thor was the favorite brother and all, but he truly thought Odin and Frigga were his parents. So when Loki came into contact with the Casket of Ancient Winters, he actually thought he was cursed. Now, the Casket of Ancient Winters was safely stored in Odin's vault at this time, and we see it for the first time in the comics in Thor issue 346. And it made it to the big screen in 2011 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the Casket of Ancient Winters is a relic that doubled down as a deadly weapon, belonging originally to the Frost Giants. So Loki felt this without even knowing his true heritage, and he still felt this power, and it has the ability to unleash the fury of 1,000 killing winters. So you open this thing and it's trouble. You better be ready for quite a rush. It took all of Heimdall's strength to just break through this ice when Loki used it against him later on in Thor 1. Coming from a guy who lives in Canada, it doesn't look too bad. Wear some layers, grab a coffee, you'll be fine. And before we continue on with this Loki list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, it looks just like that, maybe a little less nice. That would be great for our studio. It really does help us out quite a bit, especially while we're working from home for this last little chunk. It really does go a long way for us. So thank you so much for your patience and support. Let's get right back into this video. Number 6, solitary confinement. So after the events of the original Avengers movie, when Loki didn't steal the Cosmic Cube and break the timeline, he was actually sent back up to Asgard to do some time. Now, in usual fashion, he attended a hearing where he was sentenced to life in the Asgardian dungeons. Now, the only reason he was still alive in the first place is actually because of his mother, his adoptive mother, Frigga. The trial was nuts. Loki got absolutely blasted. He was roasted. He was told his birthright was to die as a child, cast out on a frozen rock. So when he got cozy in confinement, his mother came in to say some last words to the fallen son. She was calm, she shared concern about his holding cell. It was a beautiful moment where you could tell Loki wasn't so evil after all. He wasn't manipulated from the Cosmic Cube anymore. He cared for his mother through all of this, and when he went out to touch her hand one last time, it ended up just being magic. She wasn't actually there. Now, funny enough, in a deleted scene, this moment is even more heartbreaking. The scene showed the two talking as they did in the final cut of Thor: The Dark World, but Frigga told Loki that a true king admits his faults. And then Loki responds with, well, Odin's not my real father, so you're not my real mother. Number 5, cursed advice. Algrim the Strong was a lieutenant of the Dark Elves leader Malekith, and he was serving his master Malekith, you know, the MCU's best villain, Malekith, him. Algrim was locked up with Loki at the same time in those dungeons. He actually sacrificed his life to become the last of the cursed. Much like Loki in Avengers 1, he too got locked up with bigger intentions. So once he transformed using the Curse Stone and he punched his way out of the dungeons, he debated setting Loki free, but again, he was frail and small, so he's like, no. Walking away, Loki tipped him off to the best escape route to the Asgardian shield generator, and after Kurse demolishes that, the other Dark Elves were able to invade Asgard, and then Kurse met up with Malekith, and after failing to retrieve the Aether, Kurse stabbed Frigga in the back with her own sword. To think Loki helped this guy out, that's crazy. He's like, hey, try those stairs, you get there faster. And then now his mom's dead. Way to go, Loki. This was after he chose not to free Loki as well, so Loki just gave the advice just cuz.
Coming in at number 4. A troublesome imp from the same 5th dimension as the Superman villain Mr. Mxyzptlk, the Bat-Mite is honestly more of a nuisance than a flat-out supervillain, often appearing just to try and challenge Batman or to see more of his heroic acts. Sending Bat-Mite back to his own dimension is usually a tall order, given his complete reality warping powers, but luckily, the world's greatest detective is usually smart enough to outwit Bat-Mite and send him packing to where he truly belongs.
Number 3, beaten to death. In the 2004 Loki series, it picks up with Loki claiming leadership of Asgard. It's a dream come true this time around. He has the throne officially, but the throne life isn't what he expected, really. Those who helped Loki become a king now want him to continue and fulfill his promises. So Loki would now go to his prisoners, Thor and Lady Sif, for some ruling advice, you know, one of those. It's like when somebody becomes manager and they don't know how to manage, so they're like, how do I do this? And you're like, I'm making $12, man, I don't know, you gotta figure this one out. After some events, it's decided that Thor will be beheaded the next day at dawn. But in typical Loki fashion, he went against fate and opted not to follow through last minute. He spared his brother and freed him, but Hela was actually revealed to be another version of Loki, just used as an illusion to get Thor killed. So when Thor was free, he was like, you know what, I'm just gonna finish this myself. And he beat Loki to death. It was brutal. Number 2, killed by Thanos. Yeah, we gotta mention this one. I'd say it's a pretty bad day. The final scenes of Thor Ragnarok, we find Thor and Loki aboard the new ship, the new Asgard, after the old one got blown to smithereens. Loki looks at Thor and tells him how much he reminds him of Odin. It's a very sweet moment between the brothers. Finally, they're close and they're ready to do some good. Then all of a sudden, this big ship approaches and audience knew who it was right off the bat. Loki met his fate before the title card even appeared in Avengers Infinity War. He tried to go out like a hero and he put his tricks to use, but Thanos saw it coming. And the crack we hear in Loki's neck is, I still hear it in my head. No resurrections this time, Thanos says, before dropping his lifeless blue body on the floor of the ship. Right before Loki gets the chokey, he does say something to Thor that stuck with him and fans. He assures them that the sun will shine on them again. So I'm hoping that Loki comes out of this alive somehow. I think the Disney show is gonna bring him back in a way like they did with Vision. It's possible. And finally, number 1, TVA trouble. Loki is quick on his feet. Even when he was in the midst of being detained after Avengers 1, he still got his hands on the Tesseract for 2 seconds in Endgame, and poof, now he was gone, disrupting all these timelines. Now this probably felt good in the moment. He's like, ah yes, the Cosmic Cube, here we go, time to make a getaway. But luckily for us, the Time Variance Authority was waiting for him. He gets arrested by them, his clothes get ripped off, he is now a prisoner of the TVA. Now the TVA is the Time Variance Authority. It's an organization that protects timelines, and Owen Wilson is his character named Agent Mobius, and he explains to Loki that they need him to restore the timelines. Now this is going to be a fun series. I've actually been looking forward to this, I think the most since all of these shows were announced, right beside WandaVision. I'm like, it's going to be good. The fact that this is 2012 Loki again is just the icing on the timeline cake. I'm excited to see more of this character arc on screen because we missed like 4 years from when he became a king at the end of Thor 2, and then we cut to Thor Ragnarok and it was like a comedy buddy cop movie. Like I want to see that dark stuff in between. I want to see that dark Loki still. I want to see more monologues, more Mewling Quim comments, that kind of stuff. Now he's gonna be DB Cooper? Let's go, sign me up.
Number 10, United Villains. It almost felt like Loki was trying to make up for doing something really good for the heroes in the world and for, you know, causing a bunch of harmful things for himself when he brought the Avengers together with this plot. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover, Loki, under the guise of a businessman, used his skills as a master manipulator to bring together the Prime Movers, a very contradictory team of powerful villains who all hated the Avengers and heroes in general, and sought to destroy them by attacking them with less conventional villains. The team was made up of Dr. Doom, Kingpin, Mandarin, Wizard, Magneto, and Red Skull, and their plan was actually pretty solid. It sounds like it wouldn't work, but it actually worked pretty well. However, even Loki couldn't manage to keep the group together, and they ended up breaking up, mostly due to everyone's mutual hatred of Red Skull. Which, yeah, I get it. Also, when you put Magneto and Red Skull on a team together, I mean, what do you expect to happen? They're obviously gonna break up. It's terrible match. Number 9. Formed the Avengers. If you thought Nick Fury brought the Avengers together, then you might be surprised to hear this. In the comics, however, it was not Fury's plot that brought all of Earth's mightiest heroes together, but Loki's. Granted, Loki hadn't planned on doing so, and in the end it actually resulted in way more trouble for him and many other villains in the Marvel-verse besides than he could have ever imagined. Loki was the first villain the team would come up against in Avengers issue number 1, and the villain who would unite them together, much like in the MCU actually, but with less scepters and invasions and with more tricks and illusions and like magic. Loki tricked the Hulk into destroying a train track, thereby endangering human lives. And although no one was hurt because the Hulk actually saved everyone from his own breaking of the train track, the people still saw the Hulk as a monster, and it was this event that brought the Avengers together. In the end, it was revealed that Loki was behind all of it, and the Avengers ended up uniting to defeat him. So yeah, this was one of the worst things Loki kinda did to himself even. That's super tricksy. Number 8. Madame Masque. Madame Masque is the daughter of Count Nefaria. She goes on to become a rival of Kate Bishop's, Hawkeye, when Kate teams up with Clint in David Aja and Matt Fraction's Hawkeye series, but then decides to go her own way, heading out to live in LA. During her time there, Kate crosses paths once more with Madame Masque and her father, Count Nefaria. Mainly though, Kate pisses off Madame Masque, aka Giulietta Nefaria. Prior to that, Madame Masque was actually known for being an Iron Man villain, as well as sometimes an Iron Man ally and even an Iron Man love interest. Madame Masque has also worked alongside her father, and ultimately her allegiance often remains with her family, which means that no matter how many times she ends up on the straight and narrow, even becoming a borderline hero at times, she pretty much always returns to her criminal ways. Madame Masque, like her father, has also been allied with the Magia and worked as a criminal leader and mastermind for that organization. Number 7. Was defeated? But how can this be the worst? Well, because it put Loki in a position of great power, and he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for his meddling brother Thor. Some theorize that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki actually allowed himself to be defeated by the Avengers in that first film. The whole invading Earth wasn't actually something he wanted or needed, but it was actually all part of a grander scheme to get caught and then be put in exactly the place he needed and in fact wanted to be in order for him to later take over Asgard. Of course, we don't know if this is true or if he was really the puppet in an even greater scheme where Thanos was the master the whole time, which does kinda sound more likely, but I like to think that almost everything has been part of Loki's plan, including any deaths he's seemingly suffered, because he's just a master manipulator. Also, all these deaths are all fake, and I don't believe any of them. I see you, Loki. Even that last one. We got that last one, everyone was like, oh, he's definitely dead, and I was like, he'll be back. I don't believe it. And he is back now. Granted, it's a different version of him, but still, I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna say, don't believe any of it. Don't believe any deaths. They're all lies. Number 6. Impersonated Scarlet Witch. And while impersonating her, also kinda made out with Clint Barton, who was Ronin at the time. In fact, this is one of the things that tipped the heroes off to her true identity, because apparently Clint has some kind of magical kissing power. Wait a minute, that's not Scarlet Witch. I would know her kiss anywhere. Since when did Clint and Wanda make out enough for him to be able to identify her kiss instantly? Also, how different are Loki's and Wanda's kissing styles? I want to know. Like, are they radically different? Are they a little different? What level are we talking about here? Loki's plan here, of course, was to impersonate Wanda so he could help create his own team of Avengers, which he would then use against Norman Osborn. Perhaps he was resentful because he wasn't invited to Osborn's Dark Avengers? How rude. While multiple people were suspicious that it wasn't Wanda, eventually Loki's illusion was broken fully by Wiccan, Wanda's reincarnated, formerly self-constructed son. I hope that makes sense to you. That's what he is, I don't know. Before we move on to the next spot, it's time to do that thing. You know that thing where you click that like button if you are liking this video. Yeah, do the thing. Number 5. Betrayed Thor. Was anyone anyone surprised? No, not even Thor was surprised on this one, but it didn't make it any less awful. This moment comes to us from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Thor Ragnarok, after Loki and Thor finally seem to be willing to put the past behind them and work together for once to save Asgard, Loki decides to betray his brother yet again. He plans to alert the authorities and have Thor captured in exchange for a hefty reward, meaning that Thor would be likely eternally imprisoned and trapped on Sakaar, which would also leave Asgard eternally doomed with Hela in charge. Easier to let it burn, Loki says, before Thor reveals he was expecting the betrayal and tases him remotely. Number 4. Red Tool. Red Tool is actually not from an alternate Marvel universe, but is actually from DC Comics. Oddly enough, while Marvel's Deadpool was created by Rob Liefeld and Fabian Nicieza to be a parody of DC's Deathstroke, DC then decided to themselves parody Marvel's own parody of their character, creating Red Tool, who is a parody of Deadpool. He's a parody of a parody. Still, just because we are stuck in a weird perpetuation of parody doesn't mean that Red Tool has to be a super light and fun character. Although he kind of is that too. Red Tool is dark in the fact that he only fights with tools, including power tools, making his physical conflicts also appear a lot more gruesome than his Marvel counterpart. And he doesn't have a healing factor, instead he just can't feel pain, due to having a part of his brain removed, which also makes him somehow even more disturbing of a character than Marvel's Deadpool. Pretty impressive actually. Good job, DC. Number 3. Bartered with Enchantress's hand. Not my hand! But also, this is very serious. I don't know why I'm laughing, it's very serious, this is terrible. Loki did this not once even, but twice. Both times Idun was not even consulted, and the second time around she was full on tricked by Loki. Idun was known as the keeper of golden apples. She is very important to the Asgardian people because of her being the only person who can pick the golden apples, which are what grant the Asgardians their eternal youth and vitality, making them immortal as well. So it's a really important job. The first time it was Loki who promised, but also managed to avoid Enchantress being married off, but this only resulted in greater trouble for Thor when it was revealed the mason he had bartered with was actually a frost giant in disguise. So he tricked him and then he kind of had to fight a frost giant. That's where Thor comes in. The second time, he once again promised her hand to a frost giant in order to save his own skin from starvation and from his own banishment. This time around, Thor once again had to save the day, but Idun was still imprisoned for a time and likely traumatized from the whole experience in the end. Number 2. Stole Sif's body. This has to be by far one of the worst things that Loki has done. And what's worse, he did it for the most petty of reasons. Like many of his antics, it was simply to piss off Thor. At first, Thor actually wondered why Loki had returned to life, resurrected in a female form, but Loki played it off as just like, oh, this is just some coincidence, I just happened to be reincarnated in a female body, don't worry about it. Later, however, we'd learn about the horror that Lady Loki really was. Loki in Sif's body having stolen her body, the body of his enemy, to parade around in and just use as he pleased. Ugh. This also greatly affected Lady Sif even after she had her body back. She remarked how even though she was supposed to be this strong and fearless warrior, she found herself trembling at the slightest unknown shadow, terrified that Loki was lurking around a corner waiting to return and claim her body as his own. Ugh, I don't like that. Number 1. Killed his younger self. Kid Loki was one of the best versions of Loki we'd ever got. And by best, I mean the most honest, the most true, the kindest, the most heroic. He was a trickster, but a seemingly innocent one, a nice one. Kid Loki was on a path of redemption. He was basically a hero, but not even Loki could let Loki redeem himself, seeing that no one would ever see him as anything other than the god of lies, no matter how much good he did. King Loki took out revenge on everyone around him, eventually even killing his own more naive persona and self, Kid Loki. Or really, more younger Loki at this point. Basically, Kid Loki is like a younger version of King Loki. It's all Loki, but yeah, he killed the nicest Loki. Sad.
Number 10. His origins. Of course, we have to start at the beginning. Ultimate Loki entered the chat in Ultimates 2 issue 1. He is the son of Odin and Farbadi. He was born basically as a peace settlement between Asgard and Jotunheim. So Loki, half-brother Thor, and Balder were the original Warriors 3 here. So Loki would battle these frost giants, they fought in the 1,000-year war, and finally the Asgardians were deemed the victors. So the 3 of them now entered this tournament with other Asgardian warriors, and that's where he was defeated defeated by his brother Thor for the first time. Number 9, a message. So while the brothers were fighting, Loki was warning Thor at the same time. You know, the usual monologue while we're fighting. Now, as the battles begin, Loki strikes Thor, and Thor gets a little excited. He's like, oh, that's how we're gonna be, brother, let's do it. Or whatever, you know, they sound like. I'm not man enough to do the He's like, okay, that's how it's gonna be, I see, let's do it. So while they're fighting, Loki begins to warn Thor of what's gonna come after their victories. He tells Thor that they're getting ready to enter very dangerous times, and Thor is confused. He's like, I'm sorry, I thought we just beat everybody. That's why we're celebrating, no? And that's the whole point of this. It's over, we won. Now Loki agrees, but in doing so, this victory, it ended a stalemate that existed for 1,000 years. Now during war, they know who they were. Now that it's over, now what? Who are these guys? What do they have to do now? Now everything changes. Balder comes in after beating those other guys, and he and Thor kept battling, both pretty much ignoring Loki and his warning. Classic. Thor pulls his hammer out to light the place up whilst presenting the victor of the battle, Balder. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. It's really helpful for us on our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you for your support. Let's get right back to this video.
Number 8, Rick Grayson. In a weird way, Rick Grayson was kind of Batman's fault, although KG Beast was the one who shot Nightwing, resulting in the brain damage that would of course affect his memories and leave him as Rick Grayson. Just around the time we had only just got him back as Nightwing as well. It would later be revealed that this incident was actually part of a larger plot, a plot to break Batman concocted by Bane and in part Thomas Wayne Sr., aka Flashpoint Batman. This proves that just being close to Batman can lead to all sorts of messed up things happening, including you forgetting who you are and instead of getting to be a hero again, becoming a very lost man named Rick, and later a brainwashed pawn of Jokers known as Dickie Boy. Rick Grayson was not a great time for Nightwing in the comics, and it all pretty much happened just because he was close to Batman and could be used as a tool to hurt him. So basically just one of the worst things I guess Batman can even do to anyone is be like, hey, you're cool and I like you. If Batman likes you, that's not good, probably. Villains will come for you.
Number 7, Baron Zemo. In 1939, supervillain Baron Zemo rose to take over Asgard. Well, it wasn't actually Baron Zemo, it was the Lord of Mischief himself, which you probably could have guessed. He planned an attack on Asgard and his backup was quite intimidating. He had German soldiers and frost giants ready to fight all under his command. Now after a quick Heimdall cocktail, all of these soldiers and giants were just amped up. The Norn stones mixed with Heimdall's blood, yup, it just empowered them, and just as he told Thor, trouble is indeed on its way. Chaos ensued, but luckily Odin stepped in and banished Loki to one of the worst rooms ever, the room without doors. How do we get out? How do we get in? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So Loki apologizes before he disappears, and he says he's sorry. Sorry for nothing, that is. Oh, had him in the first half. You thought. Number 6, Ragnarok. So Loki was sent to the room without doors, but the gang wasn't out of the woods yet. We still have to deal with the giant army, duh. So Odin was then attacked by the leader of the frost giants, Mammon, and once Thor took care of that, he went to check in on his father, and as he was fading away, the world tree began to burn. And as Odin died, so did Asgard. So Thor was a little upset at this point, a little upset. So he went on a bit of a rampage, as he should. Now, what ended up happening here was because the Ultimate comic goes back and forth. Now, back then, before returning to Asgard, Loki had left those Norn stones with a young soldier named Helmet, and also instructions on what to do with them. So he's not like, cool, is that a sapphire? What is this gem? What are these gems? So cut to 60 years later, Thor is on Earth, Helmet opens this portal to the room without doors, and Loki is now free. Thing is, Loki was still a god when he went in. He hasn't gone anywhere, whereas Thor and Balder were reborn as mortal men. So now we got a problem. Number 5, Loki's return. So the god of mischief is back again, and he spent some time under house arrest, and following the failed Chitauri invasion, Loki teamed up with the Liberators in an attempt to take down the Ultimates, which sounds bad enough, but then he also had plans to start World War III. Because, you know, why not? In Ultimates issue 2, Loki used his reality-changing abilities and created the identity of Gunnar Goldman, member of the Norwegian Super Soldier program, and he used Thor's past life as Thorleif in order to make Thor seem like he's going insane. And it worked. Now, he wasn't quite done there, however. See, Loki had also tried to frame Captain America for what happened to Clint's family. He was blending in as a leader, not using his powers, or else Odin would be able to find him. but I'll get into that a little later on. Now thankfully the Liberators weren't able to defeat the Ultimates, but Loki still wanted to try after failing this many times. So he attacked the Ultimates again, but the Scarlet Witch and her probability powers summoned Thor, so that didn't happen.
Number 4, used his daughter as bait. For those of you that don't know, Wade Wilson has a daughter, little Ellie Camacho. Wade generally tries to keep some distance between him and Ellie and her mom for their own safety, unless apparently there is a copycat on the loose bent on ruining his reputation. Then he thinks it's perfectly fine to put his daughter in harm's way. When Madcap was running around pretending to be Deadpool, Wade came up with a plan to catch him, inspired by the film Jaws. He would use Ellie as his chum, aka bait, to draw out the shark, aka Madcap. The plan worked, but it put Ellie in a great deal of danger. Fortunately, Quicksilver was on standby to save her, but still pretty reckless parenting on Wade's part.
Number 3, he got out again. Get out of town. Loki? No way, how? Loki somehow got free from Odin and tried to take on Thor yet again, but this time with trolls as backup. He wanted to annoy Thor to a point where he would just go nuts, and then Thor would be the one to lose control and destroy Earth. Like I would do to my older brother all the time. I would bug him, then he'd swear, then I'd tell on him for swearing, and then he'd get grounded. Easy, right? You're welcome. Thing is, Loki ended up taking out Valkyrie, Thor's girlfriend, which never happened in our family, thank God. But this got heated, right? Where Hela had to get involved now. Hela brought Valkyrie back to life, this time as a real Valkyrie, and then she killed Loki. See ya, pal. He went straight to the underworld, straight to hell. But even there, he planned for yet another escape. You gotta respect the hustle, he doesn't quit. Number 2, powers and weaknesses. So we're gonna see many tricks from Loki in this Disney show, and in the Ultimates alone, Loki's abilities are quite impressive. To see a handful of these would just spoil us. He can shuffle space and time, as I mentioned before, but there's a lot to that. So any attacks against Loki are fixable because he can just alter his own godly strength to resist said injuries. He can make you talk to a person that's not even there, make you look absolutely insane, and with multiple copies of Loki, not only will you get a headache from all the monologues, but he's equally as strong as Thor with those numbers. His weaknesses come from his home life, of course. Odin can control quite a bit of this chaos. So if Loki uses all of his power, full capacity, Odin will be able to find him. It's like yelling really loud. They're like, why is he yelling? Oh, it's Loki. Get over here. During Ultimates 2, Thor mentions that Loki's powers had weakened, and it was unclear why at that point. But later on, comments from Loki implied that Odin was the reason behind this all along. And finally, number 1, his death. It's no surprise Loki escaped from hell afterwards when Asgard came to Earth, and during the attack of the Children of Tomorrow, Loki finally met his fate while battling alongside other Asgardians. But not Thor. See, Thor is now in Valhalla at this point. He got released, but he had to have a child with Hela first. So his hands were full. So Thor was able to see Loki's ghost as well as other Asgardians and his nephew, Modi, and you can find the last of Ultimate Loki in Ultimates Volume 2, Issue 2. Number 10, Kid Loki. One of the versions of Loki that were rumored to get in the Disney Plus original is Kid Loki. Jack Veal's name has been whispered through the winds, and honestly, I could see it. I mean, look at him. He looks very Tom Hiddleston-y. Now in the comics, Kid Loki too was also a nuisance. Kid Loki came around in Thor issue 617. Now after adult Loki sacrificed himself for Asgard, he was sent with the Dark Avengers from Norman Osborn, and he had a change of heart in regards to, well, Asgard's fate. He returned to Earth looking better than ever, just with a few memories from his previous life. A little young Tot with a few memories, that's cool. Even when he's commanding the Dark Avengers and changes sides, he always has a backup plan. So that's what makes this character so compelling. This guy died 3 times in the MCU, and he's probably gonna die 4 times more. Maybe even 5 times, I don't know. I'm gonna bet 3 times. He's gonna die 3 times in the show. I could see them killing him once an episode, kind of like South Park Kenny style, you know? Now Kid Loki's cool because he travels with a companion, a trusty magpie named number 9, the Devil. Okay, this first one isn't exactly shocking. One of the many versions of Loki, and one of the earliest, was in Venus issue 6, back in the late 40s, back in the 1940s, that's so old. See, Loki at this time was banished from Olympus to the Olympian underworld of Hades by Zeus. It's unclear what exactly he did, but considering the fact that he's referred to as Satan, it could be literally anything. I mean, insert bad thing here, you know? But he had a son, appropriately named Son of Satan. Okay, better than Kyle, I don't know. Is it? No. The two of them were punks. They were obsessed with being romantically involved with Venus. I mean, sure, she's the goddess of love and all, but the both of you want her? It's kind of weird, it's gross, it's a gross dynamic. What an awkward drive that must be. Loki's son disguised himself. He went to the offices of Beauty Magazine where Venus worked, and then he's like, hi, I'm Mr. Saturn. Like, pick a new name, first of all, way too close. They're like, Satan? He's like, no, it's Saturn. Damn, that was close. Now, his son was insane. He would cause these natural disasters on Earth, because, you know, love. So Venus finally agreed to be with him, and then when he stopped fighting, Venus hucked a fireball at him and made him orbit the planet for all of eternity. So Devil or Kid Devil, whatever version you're getting, doesn't matter. Loki always wants the attention.
Number 8. Betrayed Don Rigoletto. The original Rigoletto. There is actually another Don Rigoletto who succeeded the original. He too, however, was taken out by Kingpin. Wilson Fisk used to be the bodyguard, enforcer, and kind of general right-hand man to Don Rigoletto initially in the comics. However, getting in good with Don was all part of Wilson's elaborate plot to take control of the city. He had been building connections for years, waiting for this moment when he would take out his boss and replace him. Fisk killed Rigoletto in a moment of vulnerability, near the end of issue number 3 of Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. After a meeting, Don was complaining about the request that he'd had to move into more ludicrous areas of crime. At least, areas of crime he considered to be ludicrous. I think most of us would, actually. Fisk seems to respond by giving Don a temple massage to help ease his boss's stress. However, this doesn't last, as while Don is soothed momentarily and at peace, Fisk then decides to snap his neck. The moment also goes to show just how much Don trusted Wilson. Granted, Don Rigoletto was still a crime boss, but Wilson in a lot of ways was probably a worse replacement when it came to how much power he has managed to amass and how dangerously he wields that power.
Number 7. Gunnar Goldman. Loki is a master of tricks. He can turn himself into a snake, make himself look like Steve Rogers, but when he takes the disguise of Norwegian super soldier Gunnar Goldman in the Ultimates, he makes Thor look like he's losing his mind. He makes everybody think that Thor is just a super soldier gone rogue, who has this magic belt that gives him Thor's powers. Thing is, this belt has been referenced in the MCU. Happy lists it off when he's packing up for moving day in Spider-Man Homecoming. So the Ultimates of course believe Gunnar, and they're just about to attack Thor, but alas, the day is saved and Loki's schemes come to an end. For now. Number 6. Sleipnir. There have been a few origins for Sleipnir, and for this list we're gonna go with the more fun one. Also the more kind of gross one. So Odin tasked Loki to handle this situation, okay? So the situation was this dude came along and offered to fix Asgard's wall, but the terms were shady. See, if he completed the wall within 6 months, he would be awarded the moon, the sun, and Freya. The 3 things we all want in life. So they waited until the last brick, and then Loki turned into this. He turned into a beautiful white mare and lured the man's horse away. Because see, the man turned out to be, well, not a man at all. He was rather a frost giant in disguise. So after the deal was made, Odin's like, oh, did we just shake on that? So Loki led his horse away, disguised also as a horse, while Thor handled the big guns himself. Now if you thought that was a cool trick, let me tell you, Loki is so committed that he straight up gave birth after this to Sleipnir later on. Number 5. Scarlet Witch. This would mess things up a lot if Loki decided to do this. He's posed as an Avenger in the past a couple times now. He's taken on the form of Captain America, briefly, but in Mighty Avengers 21 Dark Reign, Henry Pym is put in charge to lead this new team. Now at this point S.H.I.E.L.D. has fallen and Norman was running the Dark Avengers, so Scarlet Witch was calling the shots. But it's a list of alternate Lokis, and I just did this, so you're probably onto something. Loki's idea was to pose as the Maximoff twin to go against Osborn's team, but there was another twin that was onto something as well. Wanda's son Wiccan cast a spell that exposed Loki. So smart. Imagine if Wanda in the MCU is like, oh, Westview? That was Loki.
Number 4. Killed by Thanos. Is there anything worse than ceasing to exist? When Thanos performed his legendary snap with the Infinity Gauntlet, literally half the universe was wiped away, but I was too busy worrying about Spidey to even comprehend the destruction. Seeing Spider-Man disappear like dust on the big screen was seriously heart-wrenching for a lot of people, but it also spawned a generation of hilarious memes, perfectly balanced as all things should be. Luckily for us, these events are undone eventually, but man, there's nothing like seeing Spider-Man die to sober you up.
Number 3. 616 Loki. Of course, one of the earliest versions of the character came to us from Stan Lee. It was introduced to readers in Journey into Mystery issue 85. Before Loki ends up getting up to anything crazy or godlike in the comics, he already was condemned by the gods, and his punishment was actually pretty brutal. He was stuck in a tree, not like up in a tree, like inside of a tree. He's to remain there until somebody sheds a tear for him. Now he's been in there ages, so at this point nobody really gives a damn. And then over time he begins to finally understand how to control the tree. Not like Harry Potter style, but you know, he can move a branch or two. So when Heimdall is passing by, he commands the tree to shed a leaf, and the timing was just so perfect. The leaf drifted right into his eye, boink, and then voila, we have now a shedded tear that was caused because of Loki. technically. And his first plan of attack was to seek revenge against the one responsible for his #TreeTime, Thor. And number 2, Lady Loki. Okay, so Lady Loki is practically confirmed for the Loki show. In a Vanity Fair interview, Loki's head writer Michael Waldron hinted that some Loki love stories are in the first season. And I know they say opposites attract, but Loki and Lady Loki sounds too good to pass up. She came around in Marvel Comics originally during Avengers Disassembled, when Loki stole a body that was intended for Lady Sif. So perhaps, and I know this is a reach, perhaps they can explain her absence in the MCU by maybe introducing this Lady Loki and then using that story in some way, shape, or form. It could also set up some interesting timeline changes with Thor, Love, and Thunder. Or it could be just like 2014's Loki's Agent of Asgard, where Loki just disguises himself as a woman. But I feel like Sophia DiMartino will be her own version of the character. I'm honestly looking forward to anything we get. I'm looking forward to all these new characters and relationships that are coming with this show. All this alternate timeline stuff is fine, but Owen Wilson, Lady Loki, like yes. All of the yes. And finally, number 1, 2012 Loki. Remember when the world was supposed to end in 2012? Well, that was the case for the MCU as well. Perhaps one of the worst versions of Loki is the main Loki we're getting for this TV show. When he failed to take over the world in 2012's Avengers, he got another chance thanks to, well, the Avengers. They decided a time heist in New York was the best way to bring back half the population, and while it worked, sure, for the most part, give or take a few casualties, the team was forced to run the clock back even more in history after they lost the Tesseract. Now, in that version, Loki grabbed it and vanished. Now, after this long, we get to now find out just where he went, and this is an interesting time for the Trickster because he sacrificed his life at the beginning of Infinity War to try and save the day, but he promised to Thor right before he got the old Loki chokey, he promised to Thor that the sun would shine on them again someday. So could this show be that someday? Could this be the glimpse of hope? Now in trailers and clips, it looks like one of these episodes will feature a what if type scenario. We see Loki standing in front of New York City, only it looks much worse, and the Avengers Tower is out of commission. It's practically fallen to the ground. So I'm hoping we're gonna get to see an evil 2012 Loki again. This is gonna be really dark. Whatever happens in that episode doesn't look good at all. Whatever happened here and whatever timeline could point to Loki finally being the king of Asgard. Possibly. What do you guys think?
Coming in at number 10, we have Morgan Edge, the founder of Intergang. An international crime syndicate working in the shadows across the entire globe, Intergang was created while Morgan was being manipulated and tutored by Darkseid, who had been sending visions to Morgan ever since he was just a little boy. Appearing to the public to be the charismatic leader of a media corporation and a potential rival to Lex Luthor, Morgan was secretly running one of the world's biggest crime empires, all in the service of an intergalactic warlord. Some people just do it for the money, but Morgan Edge had a different sort of reasoning entirely, and even after cutting ties with Darkseid, would go on to help form the Superman Revenge Squad. Coming in at number 9, we have Sal Maroni, one of the biggest mob bosses in all of Gotham City without any superpowers. Known for having zero regard for human life and having even supervillains think he's a cold-hearted murderer, Sal's most iconic moment was actually the creation of a villain later in this list, when he threw acid in the face of District Attorney Harvey Dent and permanently scarred both his face and his soul. And while this acid attack was retconned during the New 52 into having been committed by someone else in Harvey Dent's life, Sal continues to appear in Batman comics as a vicious and intimidating mafia figure.
Number 8, Ickle, which is Loki backwards, if you didn't catch that already. So in Journey into Mystery issue 622, Kid Loki needed to figure out why he was reborn, right? All these memories have now vanished, so what's going on? So he transported himself to a hidden chamber where he met a spirit, the ghost of Christmas past. Nay, he met the spirit of himself from the past. So he caught Kid Loki up and explained why he wanted this fresh start, a free future. And Kid Loki was like, hold up, let me help you out here. How about you stop the whole being a spirit thing and I'll just turn you into a magpie. So now he's a magpie. Loki is now a magpie. Okay. Kid Loki now has a pretty exciting partner. A cute partner too, might I add, little red eyes. How lovely.
Coming in at number 7, we have Carmine Falcone. Potentially the most powerful member of the criminal underworld that isn't also a billionaire or wears a supervillain outfit, Falcone is the definition of traditional organized crime in Gotham City. Nicknamed the Roman because of his political violence and eagerness to expand his criminal empire, Falcone was one of the earliest foes of the Batman and had nearly the entire Gotham police force on his payroll during the Caped Crusaders' earliest days. And while Batman has since been able to shrink Falcone's influence over Gotham significantly, he's still a dangerous foe that likes to press his advantage every time there's a power vacuum amongst the many supervillains of Gotham City. And speaking of supervillains, coming in at number 6, we're finally getting to Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Originally fighting on the side of justice with Bruce Wayne as Gotham's district attorney, Harvey Dent's mind was split in two following an acid attack from Sal Maroni that scarred exactly one half of his face. Making all of his decisions through a coin flip based on his past childhood trauma, Two-Face is one of the most well-known villains of Batman, and has managed to turn his tragic scarring incident into a criminal empire, capable of going toe-to-toe with criminals that Harvey Dent had once put behind bars. He might be crazy and his methods may seem randomly 50-50, but Two-Face is definitely still smart enough to be one of Gotham's most devious criminals. Coming in at number 5, we have Waylon Jones, aka the infamous Killer Croc. Born with a medical condition that just may be alien in nature and gives him the appearance of a human-crocodile hybrid, Killer Croc initially used his overpowered figure to wrestle with crocodiles for a local circus. However, he soon found out that the world of Gotham's criminal underbelly was far more lucrative for someone of his bloody talents, and became a rising star on the criminal scene, ascending so fast that many other supervillains attempted to kill him before he could become too big of a threat, including the Joker. Ever since, Killer Croc has been considered one of the most dangerous people in Gotham, and one of the few criminals willing to literally eat his enemies.
Number 4. Killed Uncle Ben. On Earth 2301, better known as Marvel's Mangaverse, we see Ben Parker part of the Spider Clan. He's skilled and ambitious, and he even plans to open his own martial arts school. How badass is that? So during this time, he was teaching a young Peter Parker the ways of the Spider Clan. When one day Peter was rushing to avoid being late to the dojo, he was surprised to see all the lights were off. Weird. I wonder if there's like a surprise party or something, or maybe Venom's here. Let's hope it's the first one. With his last words being, "With great power comes great responsibility," he died at the hands of Venom. There's a nice scene later on where the two talk again, and Uncle Ben gives the advice needed to Peter in this dreamlike sequence. It's beautiful, but the damage Venom did on this Earth was permanent. And sad too. Quite sad.
Coming in at number 3, we have Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. The owner of the Iceberg Lounge, perhaps the most famous criminal hangout in all of Gotham, the Penguin might look similar to his namesake, but is far more deadly in reality. While an impressive crime lord, even without any superhuman enhancements, the Penguin is made extra deadly by the special umbrella he carries, which is always stuffed to the brim with different lethal gadgets to help him fight against Batman or any other supervillain that seems interested in starting a turf war. Coming in at number 2, we have the one and only Lex Luthor. Hating the idea of an alien like Superman having so much power and receiving so much love on planet Earth, Lex Luthor has been everything from a mad scientist to a ruthless businessman to even the President of the United States in his desperate quest to rid the world of the Man of Steel once and for all. Throughout all of this, Lex has secretly run one of the world's most high-tech criminal enterprises, using his various connections with other criminals to further his own schemes and either aid LexCorp or hurt Superman. He may be merely a human being, but Lex is a criminal with enough power to stand up to Superman. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the one and only Joker. With so many interpretations and versions over the years, there's one aspect of the Joker's character that seems to show up more often than not, and that's the amount of henchmen he's able to maintain control of despite his unpredictability and complete insanity. Despite all of that, the Joker's criminal empire is often capable of rivaling even those belonging to villains that have been meticulously plotting their crimes for decades. And because of his sheer unpredictability and the loyalty he's able to inspire in people crazy enough to follow him, the Joker just might be the most dangerous crime boss in the entire DC universe.
Number 10. Roche. Roche was the top crime lord in Madripoor initially. He was opposed by Tiger Tiger eventually, who was actually Jason Hoan. Hoan was caught up in a Reaver attack while they targeted the bank she worked at. Because she was a lone survivor of that attack, she ended up kind of being ostracized by her family. As such, when Hoan learned that Roche was the mastermind behind the Reaver's attack, she dedicated her life to taking him down and becoming the new head honcho in Madripoor. She became Tiger Tiger and would eventually take down Roche with the help of Wolverine during his time as Patch. Roche himself didn't have any superpowers but was extremely well connected and was quite a physically strong opponent as well, especially for just being a guy. Number 9. Tombstone. Tombstone is a villain of Spider-Man who ended up getting into the world of crime and becoming a villain because he was severely mistreated as a child and tormented by the other kids he grew up with. This was what turned Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, into an antagonist for the other kids, training to become strong so that he could torment them right back, threatening them and of course stealing their lunch money, doing all the things that meanies do. From there, Tombstone would end up growing up and into the life of a criminal. He would become an enforcer and eventually would run his own operation, becoming a crime boss of New York. One of the crime bosses who was recently called on by the mayor of New York at the time, the Kingpin himself. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about even more crime bosses in the world of Marvel, of which of course there are many crime bosses out there, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up.
Number 8. Lockdown Beatdown. Kingdom Come is a 4-issue miniseries that comes from Mark Waid and Alex Ross. It's an Elseworlds imprint. Now, in this alternate reality, 20 years into the future, our heroes have gotten a little older, so they settled into the retirement life. Now, these new anti-heroes stepped up, and new vigilantes of course soon followed. Some of them were children of the previous superheroes, so it goes kinda deep. See, Parasite breaks open a hero named Captain Atom, and you already know by his name how that's gonna turn out if something like that were to explode. Boom! There goes Kansas, gone. No, literally Kansas was gone. It was now just this wasteland. So this is when the Justice League comes in to save the day, or I guess turn the wasteland into a super prison too. That as well. So when you throw supervillains and superheroes into this alien tech super prison, there's gonna be a few fistfights, that's for sure.
Number 7. Hobgoblin. Well, you might think it's weird to include a villain like Hobgoblin on this list. The fact remains that while Roderick Kingsley is also often known as the mastermind behind that mantle, a lot of his machinations have involved him using others to build his own criminal empire. In fact, at one point he literally turned the criminal lifestyle into a complete business. He sold old mantles and equipment of minor deceased or MIA villains. In exchange for these mantles, personas, and items, he received a cut of the earnings of those he gave them to. So basically, he didn't even need to be committing any crimes, but regardless, he would still profit from others' dastardly deeds. This is like more minor, but still power broker levels of criminal shenanigans. During this time when Kingsley was the manager and owner of various villain franchises, he also allowed Phil Urich to continue to use the Hobgoblin mantle, but only if he also paid Kingsley for its use by giving him a cut. Number 6. Viper. Another rival crime lord that Tiger Tiger would eventually go up against was Ophelia Sarkisian, or as she is often known in the comics, Viper. Viper has often been in league with Hydra, but there have also been times when she's branched out on her own somewhat. For a time, Viper was actually the ruling monarch of Madripoor, seeing an opportunity to seize the nation and fill a gap after it was left without a monarch to rule over it. She ended up allying herself with Wolverine, who owed her a debt, in order to use his influence to seize control of Madripoor. And her plan? It worked. Wolverine was honor bound to Viper and did agree to marry her. However, he did end up getting Viper to agree to a divorce after leveraging her own life, which he had just both saved from demonic possession and in the process endangered. Viper would end up having Madripoor taken from her by the combined efforts of Tony Stark and Tiger Tiger, with the Tiger replacing Viper as the ruling power of Madripoor. Because I don't think Tiger Tiger becomes the princess of Madripoor, but you know. Down with the monarchy, I think, is what happens, maybe? Number 5. Power Broker. The Power Broker currently in Marvel Comics is a mysterious figure whose true identity has not yet been revealed. But previous to that, we know Power Broker is Curtis Jackson. However, with the former Power Broker now dead, that's Curtis Jackson, a new unknown character has risen up to seemingly take Jackson's place. And whichever Power Broker we're talking about, the fact remains that they are one of the most powerful crime bosses out there. They are, they have been, and they probably will continue to be. Like Roderick Kingsley's Hobgoblin, who we discussed earlier, the Power Broker is another villain who has mastered the art of turning crime into a business. In the Power Broker's case, they generally grant powers to people after getting them to sign a contract that generally promises, regardless of their alignment, a portion of the profits from said powers will be paid to the broker themselves. As heroes aren't as well known for turning profit, generally the broker's clients tend to end up as mercenaries or criminals. Power Broker also has been affiliated with Power Broker Inc., their own corporation, and the Hench app, which partnered up supervillains with compatible henchmen for when it came to their heists.
Number 4. Kill JJ. That's right, while in main continuity, JJ would end up being blackmailed by Norman Osborn, in the Ultimate Universe, he would end up being murdered by him. I know, so crazy, especially considering that Jameson thought he had actually shot Norman dead and was in the middle of panicking over the fact. Norman, however, surprised him by getting up and transforming into his goblin self, revealing that in this universe, he was Immortal Green Goblin. Yep, before we had the Immortal Hulk series, we had this.
Number 3. Count Nefaria. Count Nefaria isn't just a powerful crime boss either. Like some other bosses out there, he's also managed to get his hands on physical power and powers as well. Count Nefaria is Count Lucino Nefaria, also the father of Madame Mask. He comes from a long line of nobility, which has granted him a fortune, one that he has prided himself in growing and expanding through criminal enterprises, as Nefaria is also a member of the powerful crime organization, the Magia. Nefaria would go on to use his fortune and his pursuit in the area of science and advancement to gain superpowers himself. Shortly after this development, he would die, but then he'd also be brought back and as a result of that become even more physically and mentally powerful and durable. So Nefaria is strong in a lot of ways. Number 2. Kingpin. Probably the greatest of all criminal empire masterminds in the Marvel Universe is Kingpin. Wilson Fisk is known for being one of the most powerful, influential, and overall politically conniving and manipulative of all the crime lords out there. The crazy thing about Fisk too is, while his methods can be questionable at times, he is so powerful because he is actually a pretty good leader overall. When he was young, Fisk realized the importance of politics and became well versed in many different political tactics and political science, believing it to be the most useful skill when it came to gaining and maintaining power. And honestly, it seems like he was right. It's often his wit and his stratagem that make Fisk such a dangerous villain. Despite the fact that he is also insanely strong and physically powerful, it's really his mind and his influence that you need to watch out for. And his intel, he knows a lot of stuff. Number 1. Zhu Wenwu and the Ten Rings. Zhu Wenwu has to be the most powerful crime boss we have seen in the greater Marvel multiverse. That's right, when it comes to Earth 616, I feel like I have to give it up for Kingpin, but when it comes to the MCU, the alternate reality of Earth 199999, I think Zhu Wenwu takes it. Wenwu is the father of Shang-Chi and is an immortal crime boss whose aging was dramatically slowed by the Ten Rings. The Ten Rings are both the artifact that he wields, which grants him great power, but is also the name Wenwu gave to his army, who helped him seize power and maintain his control over the years. Wenwu built such a massive criminal empire in the known world that he began to seek out the unknown, mystical, and mysterious places on Earth, such as Ta Lo, where he ended up meeting his future wife Ying Li in his search for power. His love for Ying Li made him give up his pursuit of power, but after her death, he would soon return to a life of crime and once again continue to seek more power, believing that in giving that up, that that was what had made his family vulnerable to attack in the first place. In his place, his daughter Zhu Xialing became the ruler of the Ten Rings and her father's criminal enterprises. Number 10 created his own crime business monopoly. In issue number 50 of The Amazing Spider-Man, which also coincidentally happens to be Kingpin's first appearance ever, Peter Parker decides to call it quits on being Spider-Man. As soon as Kingpin hears tell of this, he decides to take this opportunity to put his master plan into action. He's been aiming to make the world of crime a business since day one, and now is his golden opportunity. He gets together all the major players, and they all almost unanimously agree to Kingpin taking charge of a new, fully organized and cohesive criminal empire. Well, except for the big man, who actually tries to return to the world of crime after leaving it and take charge of this new organization that Fisk basically just built. Doesn't go so great for him, as you can imagine. Unfortunately, before the end of the issue, Spider-Man has already returned, so this attempt was kinda short-lived, but it wouldn't stop Kingpin from trying to create a vast and efficient criminal empire in the future, all under his own leadership, of course. And at least it lasted for a few issues there. That attempt. Number 9 attempted to silence the press. After bringing together his crime monopoly, Kingpin began a massive crime spree, which got the notice of the press. The Daily Bugle started to talk about who could be behind everything that was going on, and decided to cover it, because well, it was news. Kingpin, however, didn't like that they were alerting the public to what was going on, or having anyone poke their nose into his affairs. He kidnapped J. Jonah Jameson in response, and threatened him to stop reporting on the increase in crime, or else. Jameson refused to abide, stating he would not be pressured into having someone tell him what he could or couldn't print in his paper. And fortunately, Spider-Man did end up arriving, and while initially getting beaten, would later save the day. Although that's not quite how Jameson, of course, would remember it. He's like, Spider-Man threatened me. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are enjoying this list and you want more lists on Kingpin, because Kingpin is awesome and he deserves to be hyped, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8 killed classic literary heroes. In Deadpool Killustrated, which is not considered canon, Deadpool extends his wrath for the Marvel Universe to even any literary figures who inspired the very characters he has hunted. He goes after Moby Dick, Scrooge, the Musketeers, Sherlock Holmes, and even puts an end to the characters of Little Women. Harsh. This may be an awful deed that Deadpool accomplished, but it also is a must-read, as Cullen Bunn is the writer behind the 4-issue series. Cullen Bunn is also known for his non-Marvel comic book work in the horror series Harrow County, which you should also read if you haven't already read it. Number 7 joined Hydra. Kingpin ended up joining up with Hydra later on, even becoming one of its leaders. Or at least, so he thought. When it was revealed that higher up the chain, the Red Skull was also involved, Kingpin decided to break ties. Evil as he was, even he didn't want to be allied with the Red Skull. However, he still, for a time, was the one seemingly controlling Hydra behind the scenes, with Supreme Hydra, who unknowingly was actually his son, Richard, reporting to him. In fact, Richard had actually infiltrated Hydra while his father was in a permanent state of shock, almost comatose, and had set up everything for his dad to simply come along and take control. Too bad Red Skull was involved though. Kingpin's plan at the time was to overthrow the United States government, and he and Hydra, up until the Red Skull reveal, actually made for a pretty powerful alliance. Number 6 put Aunt May in the ICU. While this one wasn't intentional, Kingpin did end up being the one responsible for almost killing Aunt May. Notably though, Aunt May seems to have some kind of immortality powers, at least when it comes to plots and scripts, as she didn't die here, nor has she ever really properly died anytime her life has been threatened or seemingly even snuffed out. Spider-Man had actually been Kingpin's target. This was after Spider-Man had revealed his true identity of Peter Parker to the world. This put a target on Peter's back, obviously, with Kingpin putting a hit on Spider-Man. However, the shooter who was aiming for Peter missed, and instead hit his Aunt May, who was with Peter at the time. Aunt May ended up on death's doorstep and very nearly died here. Meanwhile, Peter donned his black suit and searched for the one responsible. When he found out it was Fisk, he went to pay Kingpin a visit in prison in issue 542 of Amazing Spider-Man. Oh yeah, Kingpin did all of this from a prison cell, by the way. Peter beat him to within an inch of his life as a warning, and declared that if May didn't make it, he would be back to finish the job. It was such an evil thing that it even made Spider-Man momentarily pretty evil. Number 5 first kill. As tragic as Wilson Fisk's origins are, the fact remains that he committed his first murder at a young age. In the 1998 Daredevil series, considered volume 2 overall, in issue number 15, we get a look back on what Wilson Fisk's childhood was like. His parents struggle to make ends meet and are constantly arguing about the finances. Bills unpaid means that things are constantly turning off in the Fisk household. One such thing they end up losing is the heat, which results in Wilson's pet rat, Benjamin Franklin, freezing to death. At least, I think that's a rat. I wasn't sure if it was a rat or a mouse when I was looking at the comic, but I'm pretty sure it's a rat because of the tail. I'm no animal expert though, or rodent expert for that matter. Fisk becomes obsessed with money, and at one point is paid $15 to start a fire. When a maintenance man gets in the way of his plan, he becomes Wilson's first kill. That is how obsessive young Wilson has become at this point, and continues to be pretty much throughout his life. Pretty obsessive guy.
Number 4. Killed Uncle Ben. On Earth 2301, better known as Marvel's Mangaverse, we see Ben Parker part of the Spider Clan. He's skilled and ambitious, and he even plans to open his own martial arts school. How badass is that? So during this time, he was teaching a young Peter Parker the ways of the Spider Clan. When one day Peter was rushing to avoid being late to the dojo, he was surprised to see all the lights were off. Weird. I wonder if there's like a surprise party or something, or maybe Venom's here. Let's hope it's the first one. With his last words being, "With great power comes great responsibility," he died at the hands of Venom. There's a nice scene later on where the two talk again, and Uncle Ben gives the advice needed to Peter in this dreamlike sequence. It's beautiful. But the damage Venom did on this Earth was permanent. And sad too. Quite sad.
Number 3. Brutally kills Anatoly Renskahov. In the Daredevil Netflix series, Anatoly Renskahov is a leader of the Russian mafia in New York. When he fails the Kingpin, unable to get the true name of Daredevil from night nurse Claire Temple, Kingpin decides he wants to have a word with Anatoly. Renskahov comes forward himself, actually wishing to speak with Kingpin and kind of clear the air. But this is not the type of word Kingpin had in mind. Instead, Fisk begins to attack Renskahov, and despite Renskahov's own toughness, the man survived life in Russian prison after all, Fisk kills him using a car door to crush his head. The crazy part is throughout the scene we learn it is not Renskahov's failure that has actually ignited Fisk's rage here, but the fact that he embarrassed Wilson in front of Vanessa while the two were on a date. This just goes to show how dangerous it is to upset Kingpin, as he has generally been shown as having a very violent streak and a sometimes off-the-wall temper. To relive this moment, you can return to the shocking end of episode 4 of season 1. The Daredevil series, at least in Canada by the way, is still on Netflix and available to stream. I was watching it earlier. It's great. Number 2. Killed Spider-Man. Sometimes people forget the Kingpin isn't just a Daredevil villain, he's a prominent Spider-Man villain as well. In fact, his first appearance wasn't in Daredevil, it was actually in an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, issue number 50 to be exact, which we actually talked about at the beginning of this list. So it didn't come as a surprise when he showed up as the main villain in the Spider-Man animated film Into the Spider-Verse. At least for fans that know this about him, I guess. What did come as a surprise though was that he actually succeeded in killing Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, in the movie. Fortunately, at the same time, Spider-Man, aka Miles Morales, was just discovering his own spider powers, and had a multiversal team of spider folks end up joining him in order to stop Wilson Fisk's evil plot. Still, Kingpin did kill Peter Parker in cold blood, and then also tried to play it like he'd always thought of Spider-Man as a great hero and was friends with the guy, even throwing a banquet in Spider-Man's honor afterward and inviting love of his life, Mary Jane Watson, to it. Wow. Number 1. Completely ruined Daredevil's life. During the Born Again story arc, Daredevil's true identity as Matt Murdock ends up being used against him. Kingpin ends up acquiring this information, which was sold by Karen Page for drugs in Mexico, but finds its way to him in New York. Kingpin then attempts to ruin Matt Murdock and thereby Daredevil's life in every conceivable way. His house ends up being firebombed, and even his uniform is left in tatters. His accounts are frozen by the IRS. Fisk even tries to ruin his reputation as a lawyer by getting a police lieutenant to swear that he saw Murdock bribe a witness to commit an act of perjury while on the stand. Not only that, but he also threatens the life of Karen Page as well, almost killing her.